Doc_C19, interrogation. Description. Excerpt of an entry titled Old House Evidence, posted to High Strangeness Wiki, date unknown. Poster, redacted. Subject, Old House_DO3 plus AMIF footage, draft 1.4. With a runtime of 17 minutes and 53 seconds, the footage is grainy, desaturated, and unfocused. Shot on video at 30 frames a second, there is no time code or markings of any sort. The Andrew Melvin interrogation footage, AMIF, pronounced AMIF, is infamous among the conspiratorial community of Old House archivists, OHAs, pronounced OHAs. The main controversy centers around AMIF's authenticity. There are more than a few reasons to doubt the validity of the footage, and the hoax theory has not been ruled out. I myself lean toward it. However, the footage has been circulating for decades, and, to this day, no legitimate source has confessed to its fabrication. Hoax or not, it's a compelling piece of footage, and one of the few things OHAs have had that even gets close to what some might consider evidence. AMIF is responsible for a significant portion of the conspiracy surrounding Old House U12, and the tragic and very real disappearances associated with it and the surrounding areas. So why have you, dear reader, never heard of AMIF, let alone seen it? Unfortunately, due to reasons I will explain later, the footage itself is no longer available. So for now, my text description will have to suffice. Footage description, from memory and notes, not all details will be exact. Andrew Melvin interrogation footage, description by redacted. In the corner of a white-walled interrogation room sits Andrew Melvin. Wearing an orange hoodie, Andrew is hunched forward, head in his hands, staring at the floor. For 3 minutes and 31 seconds, Andrew remains in this position until, off-camera, a door clicks open. A male voice asks, "Can I get you something? Water? Coke?" Andrew does not respond. As Officer Kieran steps into frame, Andrew doesn't even look up. Kieran is bald and well-built in physique, but for the remainder of the tape we never see his face, only the back of his head. Throughout the interrogation, he consults a light green leather-bound notebook. "Andrew Melvin," he asks. Again, Andrew does not look up or respond in any way. Kieran pulls out a chair and sits down opposite. He leans forward in his seat. "I understand you're under a lot of stress here. All we're trying to do is figure out what happened to Peter." Kieran says this with a delicate and measured tone, the way a concerned father might speak to his child. "Andrew." Still, Andrew does not move. He remains motionless, head in hands, staring at the floor. Kieran shifts his weight. "Andrew." Another long moment of silence passes, only the monotonous buzz of the air conditioning and the murmur of footsteps out in the hallway, until, finally, Andrew speaks. "Is Peter okay?" "That's what we're trying to figure out here," Kieran responds. "You were the last person to see him." Andrew slowly sits up, then looks toward Officer Kieran. For the first time, we can see Andrew's face. He looks to be no more than 18 years old. His face is pale, his freckled cheeks gaunt, and even in this grainy, low-res footage, we can see the bewildered fear in his exhausted eyes. Officer Kieran consults his notebook again. "So, you and Peter Kostoff broke into the home around 9:30 p.m. last night?" "Yes." "And why'd you do that?" "Dared." "Hmm?" "It was on a dare." Officer Kieran scribbles something into his notepad. "By who?" "Who dared us?" "Yeah." Andrew pauses for 7 seconds. "The other boys," he says. "The other boys." Kieran writes something down. How many in total? 5. Yourself and Peter included? Yes, sir. Kieran's head tilts slightly. And remind me again, who are the other 3? Mason Lutt, Jeffrey Holden, and Christopher Marson. Kieran writes the names down, nodding. What were the stakes? What? What did you get out of the dare? Oh, nothing. Kieran tries to be tactful, but can't hide his sarcasm. So you broke into an abandoned house in an area that's infamous for unexplained disappearances for nothing? Can you help me understand that? We'd been drinking. Kieran nods, apparently satisfied with the answer. How many drinks? 5 or 6. So the point of entry was the back porch window, correct? Yes, in through the kitchen. And the other boys, they stood out in the yard, spurring you on? Andrew nods. So you and Peter pried the board off the back porch window, climbed through, and now you're standing in the kitchen. What happens next? Andrew shifts uncomfortably in his seat. Is Peter okay? Can I talk to him? Peter is alive. He's just being treated by a doctor right now. Andrew gulps, looks down, and runs his fingertips back and forth over the table in front of him. A fidgety, compulsive movement. Kieran says, Andrew. Andrew stops moving, looks up. Kieran prods. What happened next? Andrew looks away, staring off behind the camera somewhere. We just wandered around the main floor, he says. You had flashlights, correct? Just one. Peter was holding it. Kieran nods, writes something down. And why'd you go into the basement? Andrew visibly reacts to the word basement. His expression darkens, and he shifts uncomfortably in his seat for a long moment until... Andrew? Kieran prods again. We tried going upstairs first, says Andrew, but Peter's foot broke through the 3rd step. It was all rotten. He almost fell over backward, but I caught him. Andrew rubs his narrow jaw with the back of his hand. At that point, I just wanted to leave. We'd already been in there 5 minutes, but Peter insisted we check out the basement next, so we had a bit of a back and forth and Peter won out. You had an argument? There's a hint of repressed enthusiasm in his voice, probably searching for a motive. Andrew nods. Nothing crazy. I just had bad vibes. Wanted to get out of there. Peter said I was being a pussy, but that's just how he talks. Kieran writes more into his notebook. So you wanted to leave, and Peter insisted you check out the basement first? Yes. And what happened down there? For about 10 seconds, Andrew sits in silence, eyes flicking back and forth. Andrew? Kieran asks. We went. Andrew wipes the side of his mouth with the back of his hand and crosses his arms. We went downstairs, down through the hallways, and I didn't want to be there. I told Peter we should just head back up. What did Peter say? He said that wasn't the dare. We had to go into the basement. I could back out if I wanted, but he was going to look around with or without me. Kieran nods. Andrew continues. I didn't want to leave him alone either. Understandable. What happens next? We're down there for about 10, 15 minutes, pushing our way around piles of rubble. It's a pretty big basement. Kieran nods again. Andrew rubs his arms as if the room has suddenly grown cold. We rounded into a small room and... He goes silent. His face fills with growing fear. Like if he were to say the next words aloud, something terrible might happen. Kieran picks up on this. It's okay, Andrew. There's no rush here. Just speak when you feel ready to, okay? Andrew lowers his voice and continues. There was a door at the far end of the room. It was cracked open, but it looked new, like brand new, and everything else down there is covered in dust and rotting, but this door, it was spotless. That alone was enough to freak me out, but Peter didn't seem to care. He went over. I waited by the entrance. He pushed the door fully open, and... Andrew pauses for a moment, looks down. I had to crane my neck to see, but it led to a hallway. He looks up. A hospital hallway. Greenish-white walls, tile floor. It looked brand new, just like the door, like it had just been installed that day. Could even smell cleaning chemicals. That was more than enough for even Peter to suggest we go back, but just as he was about to turn around, he stopped. He could see something down there, in the hallway. I couldn't see it from my angle, and I started to ask him what's up, and he just shushes me. I could tell he was scared, and I'd never seen Peter scared before, not even once. Andrew clears his throat. I could have easily taken a few steps forward, looked to see what he was looking at, but I didn't want to. Why's that? I don't know. What do you think he saw? Nothing good. What happened after that? We both just stood there, completely silent for a half-minute, and I realized Peter wasn't breathing. He was motionless, like arms to his sides, flashlight pointed at the floor. Then there was a voice down in that dark hallway, a small voice. For the next 3 minutes of footage, Andrew does not blink, not even once. A remarkable feat in and of itself, and something that seems to make Officer Kieran uneasy. What did it say? Asks Kieran. The voice? Kieran nods gently. It just said, "My name isn't." Andrew trails off. Kieran asks, "My name isn't what?" That's it. Just, my name isn't. Kieran notes that down. Man, woman, child? Andrew shakes his head. I don't know. Too quiet, almost whispering. Okay, and that's all it said? Andrew nods slowly. Yes, sir. Officer Kieran scratches the back of his neck with the pen. So, then what? At this point, Andrew's unblinking eyes start watering. I told Peter we needed to get out of there. He didn't respond. He just kept staring down the hall, holding his breath. I tried to grab his arm, and he was rigid, like his joints were locked up. Then I heard a footstep, muffled in that hallway. And a few seconds later, another step getting closer. And that was more than enough for me. I hauled it out of there. Without a flashlight? Andrew shakes his head. He pauses, considering his next words carefully. I took the light from Peter, he admitted. I had to wrench it from his hand. It was gripped so tight. His voice strained with guilt. Kieran nods. And when you got outside, your other friends weren't there? Right. Kieran looks at his notebook, flips back one page. So you ran for 20 minutes to the nearest house and called for help? Andrew nods, and finally he blinks again. His blinking returns to normal for the remainder of the footage. Kieran breathes heavily out his nose. Now, Andrew, your friend Peter, as you know, he's been found by our team. He's in a catatonic state, and... Catatonic? He's not responding to anything. A waking coma, essentially. Andrew shrinks back in his chair. What about the person in the basement? Well, we did a thorough search of the entire house, and there's no sign of anyone having been there. Not in the last few months, at least. No footprints. Nothing. Andrew doesn't seem to fully grasp what Officer Kieran is telling him. He fidgets. What about the hallway? The hospital hallway? Andrew nods. Nobody on our team saw anything like that. I'll run it by the guys, but... That's not possible. It's right there. There's no way they would have missed it. It's... Andrew, I don't know if you understand what... It's right there. It's... Andrew, there's no sign of anyone having been in that house last night, you included. The window you said you broke in through, it's boarded up. Has been for quite some time. Andrew pauses, absorbing this. Then he shakes his head, unbelieving. My other friends were there. Mason let Jeffrey Holden and... Kieran glances toward his notebook. Christopher Marson? Andrew nods. Kieran sighs. There's no sign of them either. Andrew's face clouds with bewilderment. Kieran leans back slightly. You said you attend Lions Bay High? Andrew nods again. We checked with that school. They don't have any records of you or your friends. Andrew doesn't respond to that. He just shrinks into his chair. Kieran shifts closer, taking on a more aggressive demeanor. Andrew, I don't know what happened here, but I need you to be honest with me. I got a kid down the hall who's literally paralyzed with fear. I've got you telling me stories about people who don't exist, telling me you broke into a house you never broke into. So I need you to be straight with me. Why are things not lining up here? They couldn't even find you in the record check. Is Andrew your real name? What kind of drugs have you and your friend been taking? Andrew slowly looks up and locks eyes with Officer Kieran. For the briefest of moments, Andrew's fear vanishes and is replaced with a terrible emptiness. His eyes flash around the room, and then he looks directly into the camera. It's hard to fully capture the strangeness of this moment in words, but it looks as though, and I know this sounds absurd, but it looks as though somebody else jumped inside Andrew's mind for a second, took a quick look around, then jumped back out. Worse still, when he looks toward the camera, it feels as if he knows that you, the viewer, are there, knows you're watching. Sometimes even when I read back through these notes, I get that same feeling of suddenly being seen by something ancient and all-knowing. Andrew? Andrew looks back at Kieran, and his eyes return to their previous state of childlike fear. Officer Kieran clears his throat, unsettled. I just need to know what happened. Andrew nods slowly. I don't feel like myself. And how's that? Andrew sits in silence for a long moment until he says, I don't want to get put away or anything. Put away for what? For being crazy? Kieran shakes his head. No, it takes a pretty high standard for that to happen. Believe me, you're not even close. An obvious lie. Andrew doesn't even seem to be listening now. He speaks more to himself than to Kieran. I'm starting to remember things that never happened. Kieran tilts his head, unsure what to make of that. What do you mean by... It is here that the footage infuriatingly cuts to black. B.3 Footage Context, Draft 2.3. One of the many strange things about the Andrew Melvin footage is the lack of context. Despite many dedicated efforts to find its origin, the tape remains a solitary mystery. There is no paper trail, no records of its background, no records of the players involved. In regards to Officer Kieran, Andrew Melvin, and every other name mentioned in the footage, there is no external documentation or corroboration to prove any of these people have ever existed. Even the Broward County Police Department has no record of it, Cited from Broward County Police Department's official statement on the so-called AMIF conspiracy, web link redacted. Inconveniently, or conveniently, depending on your outlook, the AMIF footage has been lost. A bewildering occurrence that, in my opinion, is far more compelling than the footage itself. On June 3, 2017, at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, every single digital instance of AMIF was wiped from the internet. Every single one. From YouTube to LiveLink, all the way down to the most obscure dark web forums, AMIF vanished. Even more confounding, the Wayback Machine archives shows no record of it having been there to begin with. Some have claimed that even their hard copies of the footage went missing shortly after June 3rd. According to these claimants, there was no sign of break-in or theft. The tapes just out-and-out vanished. Again, as if they had never been there to begin with. Of course, these claims are suspect at best. Like most communities centered around the unexplained, the OHA community is riddled with grifters, liars, and lunatics, chief among them being Garrett Larson II, but that's a story for a different day. I should note here that a few have claimed that they still possess hard copies, VHS tapes, DVDs. One even says they own a Betamax version. But all of them, and I've contacted every single person who claims this, decline to upload. They, in so many words, fear it would trigger their versions to go missing as well. Convenient. And now, many who are new to the OHA community claim that AMIF never existed to begin with, that the entire community is faking it, or that the tape is some sort of complex Mandela effect. As a side note, many of these fresh AMIF-denying OHAs have broken off to form their own communities, the most prominent of which is the creatively titled NOHA, New Old House Archivists. NOHA members often refer derogatorily to OHA members as OOHAs, Old House Archivists. The funny thing is, most of these communities can't even agree on what Old House actually is. Some say it's a sanctuary for some kind of ancient entity. Some say it is a sprawling labyrinth that spreads across space and time and traps unsuspecting civilians in a maze of never-ending terror. Some say it's simply a metaphor, a mirror into humanity's fascination with long-abandoned structures. There are hundreds of theories. Long story short, when it comes to Old House and the surrounding lore, you'll get a different story depending on who you ask and how many bong hits deep they happen to be. However, in Noah's defense, if I myself had not seen the AMIF footage in 2013, I would undoubtedly join their chorus of naysaying. In this day and age, the logistics of wiping anything from the internet, let alone the hard copies along with it, are beyond impossible. But alas, the footage is, or rather was, a real thing. As you just read, I personally took detailed notes of it upon my first viewing. Disappointingly, it seems that, for the foreseeable future, reading those notes is the closest one can get to seeing the actual footage itself. I should also note that, despite my prominence in the OHA space, I do not subscribe to any group. There's no humble way to put it, but I view myself as above the fray, above the tribalism and politics of such conspiratorial communities. The infighting, outfighting, the never-ending acronyms, in my view, do nothing but delegitimize and stigmatize an already controversial area of potential research. Possibly Schuyler Goodhill, Louis Rue.
Getaway. As they wound their way down the mountain, Eve stared out at the passing trees, her forehead pressed against the glass. The reflection of her weary eyes overlaid the darkening woods outside, and every little bump in the road sent a rippling tremor through her thoughts, pushing her deeper into rumination. Something was wrong. Well, of course, everything was fucked, but there was something else. something she couldn't quite place, like a festering but crucial obligation long forgotten. Eve sat upright and pulled Charlie's locket out. Found this hanging above the fireplace. Charlie side-eyed her. One of their kids must have done it. With her free hand, she took the locket and placed it in a cup holder. Eve considered saying something more, but she switched on the radio instead. Static. She turned the dial. More static. She switched it off. Nestling into her seat, she reached into the back and scratched Shiloh behind the ear. The dog let out a high-pitched yawn. Eve looked at Charlie and asked, "Do you think Paige is gonna sue us?" Charlie hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Sue us? For the dog bite? Nah. Charlie clucked her tongue. I doubt it. She'd have a case, Eve said. How do you know? I've listened to a lot of courtroom podcasts. Uh-huh. Up ahead, a sharp corner approached. Charlie shifted into a lower gear, let off the gas. You said the bite punctured his jeans? Barely, but it drew blood. They bowed around the corner until the road straightened out again. If they come after us, Charlie said, we'll countersue for window theft. Eve rested her head back against the seat. Okay. She shut her eyes. Minute by minute, the hum of the asphalt lulled her into a restless half-sleep. Her mind floated through that liminal space, teetering back and forth on the edge of awareness. The drone of the engine seeming to grow louder and louder, until the tick, tick, tick of the turn clicker roused her. She sat up and rubbed her eyes, the remnants of another bad dream slipping away. How much time had passed? Charlie said, This work for you? Eve gazed through the windshield. They were pulling into the parking lot of the Kettle Creek Motel. The place wasn't abandoned, after all. In fact, closer up, it looked a little nicer than Eve remembered. Nothing fancy, not by a long shot. But as far as roadside motels went, it got the job done. Besides, at this point, she would have just about slept in a cardboard box to avoid spending another second in that house. Works for me, Eve shrugged. They parked beneath the bluish glow of the neon sign. The Kettle Creek Moat. As they made their way across the gravel lot, Eve peered around. The surrounding woods whispered with the rain-like patter of melting snow. At the opposite end of the lot, half obscured by a green dumpster, sat a lone white hatchback. No other vehicles in sight. She looked up. The faint impression of the setting sun filtered through the gray clouds like a flashlight pressed against a wool blanket. All seemed calm. Calm and quiet. Both things that only served to heighten Eve's anxiety. When things felt right, it only meant there was so much more that could go wrong. Stepping through sliding doors, they entered a low-ceilinged lobby. Wood vinyl walls, drab gray carpet, buzzing lights. At the far end, nestled between a dead palm tree and a Coca-Cola vending machine, the reception counter. Nobody there. Charlie, Eve in tow, strolled over and rang the bell. Ding! The sound hung in the air, fading into a long stretch of silence. Hello? Charlie tried. As they waited, Eve's gaze wandered to the lobby's back corner. There, a fire escape door was propped open with a cinder block. On the other side, frenzied moths butted against a stuttering light, their shadows casting a mad dance over the water-stained concrete. Charlie tried the bell again. Ding! Behind the counter, a red door creaked open, and a middle-aged woman poked her head out. Sporting a beehive hairdo, she wore aviator glasses and a nightshirt. She grumbled. What do you want? She looked surprised to see visitors, annoyed. A room, said Charlie. Muttering something about patience, the woman slipped back into her cave, pulling the door closed. Charlie glanced at Eve, brow raised. From behind the red door, the sound of rummaging, drawers sliding open, slamming shut, until, finally, the woman re-emerged, now wearing an oversized plaid shirt and blue sweatpants. She held a paperback novel, still reading as she ambled up to the counter and flopped down into a wicker chair. The scent of floral hairspray wafted from her, permeating the air. Charlie cleared her throat. The clerk raised a finger. 1 second. I'm almost finished with this chapter. She continued reading. Charlie and Eve shared another disbelieving look. Charlie turned back and tapped a finger against the countertop. Can we get a room? Please, Eve added. The clerk exhaled an irritated sigh. Then slowly, ever so slowly, she reached down, opened a drawer, pulled out a pink comb, slid the comb into the book, closed the book, and set the book on the counter. Unhurried, she started typing into a desktop that looked like it still ran on Windows 95. She used her pointer fingers to input one key at a time. Charlie's gaze flitted to the paperback. Good book? The cover showed a blonde-haired, blue-eyed princess sitting pretty atop a white horse. At her side, a literal knight in shining armor guided the horse down a red brick pathway. Eve couldn't see the title from her angle, but she imagined it was something like Knight of Love or A Hero's Heart. The clerk murmured, How many guests? Room for 2, said Charlie. The clerk gave Charlie a long, studied look as if she'd just asked to borrow $50 and a can of hairspray. After a slow blink, she returned to typing. 2 beds? 1, said Charlie. Again, the clerk stopped typing. Her eyes flicked to Eve, to Charlie, then back to the computer. 1 bed. She continued typing away, shaking her head, muttering. She jabbed the spacebar with a knuckle and crossed her arms. That'll be... She adjusted her glasses and leaned in close to the screen. $167. Charlie blinked. I'm sorry? And... The clerk squinted at the screen. 23 cents. Charlie scoffed. For 1 night? 1 night, 1 room, 1 bed. Charlie opened her mouth, about to haggle on price, but Eve stepped in before she could. That's fine. With keycards in hand, Eve and Charlie trudged back outside. The sun had fully set now. Black shadows spilled out from the woods, pooling around the edges of the lot like some kind of liquid ooze. The blue neon glow of the motel sign bled into the night above, glistening off the wet gravel below. And the nocturnal song of a common poor-will cried in the distance, the bird chirping out its namesake over and over. Poor Will, poor Will, poor Will. She absolutely upcharged us, Charlie said, still grumpy about the clerk. Eve shrugged, only half in the conversation. How do you know? $167? On a slow night? No shot. When I worked hospitality, we gouged anyone we didn't like. Upcharge. Charlie broke into a surprisingly good impression of the clerk. "1 night," she grumbled. "1 room, 1 bed." She glanced over at Eve, at least expecting a smile, but Eve's attention was elsewhere. Her eyes were back on the surrounding woods, scanning the darkened trees as if something might be hiding out there. Something only she could see. Sure, being away from the house was a relief, but at the room, Charlie slid the keycard into the handle. It blinked red and gave a shrill beep. Frowning, she tried again. Still no luck. Shiloh let out another little whine. Charlie checked the numbers. "Room 19? "Here." Eve handed her card over. "Try mine." As Charlie continued fumbling with the door, Eve surveyed the parking lot, paranoid. Her gaze settled on that lone white hatchback, the windows dark. Was somebody sitting in the passenger seat? She strained her eyes. Just then, light from the road ribboned through the trees and swept slowly over the lot, illuminating the hatchback's interior. Empty. The drifting light stretched long shadows across the wet gravel until... Eve looked over her shoulder. A vehicle crawled in through the entrance. Blinding headlights. 2 white orbs. Eve held up a hand, shielded her eyes. For a second, she thought it was the family's moving truck, but it pulled a slow U-turn, revealing itself to be a highway patrol cruiser. It drove off the way it came, leaving behind grooves in the gravel. "Ah," Charlie said, finally latching open the door. "10th time's the charm." She started inside, but Eve lingered behind, eyes still locked on the now empty entrance. Part of her still half expected the moving truck to shamble in, Thomas leaning out the window, grinning that perfect teeth grin. "Jeepers," he'd say. "It's a small world after all, huh?" "Eve?" Charlie's voice, distant and vague, dimly registered. "Eve." Charlie touched her arm, startling her. Eve looked back, face clouded with repressed worry. "Hmm?" Charlie set a hand on the side of Eve's shoulder. "Let's get out of the cold." The room was about what they'd expected, a cramped space, barely wide enough to fit the bed. Yellowish wallpaper covered in repetitive floral prints. Green carpets, scratchy and worn, like overgrown moss. The textbook definition of a backwoods motel. Eve wasn't complaining, though. Like she'd reasoned before, anything was better than another night in that house. As Charlie brushed her teeth in the bathroom, Eve sat on the bed, staring at a blank TV screen. A boxy tube set resting on a dresser at an odd angle. Next to the TV was a framed Bible verse. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life." John 3:16. Eve leaned over and flipped the image face down with a decisive clack. She settled back onto the bed, took a deep breath, and let it out. "You're okay," she told herself. Despite everything, each minute spent away from that house felt better than the last. Normality was returning. Shiloh clambered onto the bed and curled up near the headboard, grumbled. In the corner of Eve's eye, Charlie spat toothpaste into the sink and rinsed her mouth. She started back toward Eve. "Room's a winner, huh?" Eve forced a laugh out her nose, flopped back onto the bed, stared up at the white stucco ceiling. Charlie stepped around her. As she sat down next to Eve, the bed dipped and creaked. Grim silence followed, underscored by the hum-buzz of a rickety air vent. Outside, another sweep of headlights. They beamed through the window, shadows slinking by, everything seeming to tilt and spin before slowly plunging back into darkness. More silence lingered between them until Eve said, "Do you think I'm crazy?" Charlie snorted at the question and glanced down at her. "Who isn't?" Eve sighed and looked away. More silence. "Is this about the window?" Charlie asked. "'Cause I saw it too, which means we're both losing it." Eve shook her head. "The attic person?" Charlie nudged. Eve shrugged. "Maybe." "Eve," Charlie said, "we'll look into it tomorrow. Hell, we can call the authorities out if it comes to that, okay?" Eve nodded, her eyes locked to a random speck on the ceiling. She drew in another long breath, let it out. Pensive, Charlie ventured, "It was a rough day. Anyone would have lost their mind being trapped with that family." Eve tensed her jaw, released it. Charlie shuffled closer and lay beside Eve. She reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind Eve's ear. "You're not alone, okay? I'm here. Always." Another wary silence. Finally, Eve spoke suspicions that had been crawling around in the back of her head since Thomas told his story by the fire. I think what happened to Allison is happening to me." Charlie considered this before saying, "Because of the window?" Eve gestured up at the ceiling, as if the stucco were the problem. "Because of fucking everything, I don't know. She trailed off again, rubbed her temples. "I saw that kid holding my phone. I saw it. The screen was cracked, and then it wasn't, and you're under a lot of stress. Everyone makes mistakes. This wasn't a mistake. That was my phone. I would bet my fucking life on it. Either I'm losing it, or the phone changed. There's a lot more possibilities than... And this motel. I could have sworn it was abandoned when we drove by it the first time. Hell, we both thought that. People misremember things every single... No, this is different. I haven't even told you about the rest of my day, and... Eve, trust me, if you were losing it, I'd be the first to point it out." That was true, and it actually comforted Eve, if only a little. Her heart rate slowed, her breath deepened. Maybe she just needed a good night's sleep. She turned to face Charlie, and... "She isn't her," a voice in Eve's head whispered. This wasn't the voice of Mo. This was the voice of something different. Something far worse. Something all-knowing and ancient. A mouthless, eyeless presence leeching off the chemical fear that poured out of her amygdala. "This isn't your Charlie." The notion was so sudden, so improbable. Eve almost laughed, but despite the fact that Charlie looked just as she always had, the short black hair, the mismatched eyes, the light freckles dusting her cheeks. Some half-remembered version of Thomas's words played in her mind. Allison thought everyone around her was an imposter, that the real versions of us had somehow been replaced. So she tested us, asked us questions about the past, desperate to know if we were actually her family or... Eve, Again, Charlie cut into her spiral. What's going on? Eve sat up and looked at Charlie in the TV's reflection. How did we meet? What? How did we meet? Eve, do you seriously think Are you testing me? Please, she almost begged. Charlie, I know it's fucking stupid, but please humor me. The whole story, from the top. Despite the absurdity of the request, Eve's voice was filled with grave severity. Charlie sat upright. Okay. She slid her feet off the bed and faced the window. She took a deep breath, let it out. 8 years ago, my roommates wanted to go see a movie, Spirited Away. Which theater? Seriously? Eve looked over her shoulder, met Charlie's eyes. The Dryden Theater, Charlie relented. Rochester, New York. Do I pass? Eve grunted non-committally. She turned back to the TV screen reflection. Charlie, blurred in the glass, went on. I almost didn't go. Had a big exam coming up, but my friends were persistent, so I caved. Once we plopped down in our seats, I looked to my left, and one empty chair down, there was this girl in a lime green hoodie. She was all by herself, and you should have seen her. Sure, looks aren't everything, but she was by far the prettiest girl in the whole dang theater. Charlie trailed off, as if giving Eve a chance to retort, but thus far, dumb joke aside, all was accurate. Charlie carried on. This girl, though, she was a little strange, kept glancing over at me, and every time I glanced back, she'd look away. I think she wanted to ask me something. In the TV reflection, Charlie looked toward Eve, but Eve didn't look back. Charlie continued. So the movie ends, lights come up, credits start rolling, and the hoodie girl stays behind. Who sits through the credits, right? My friends left to go smoke, but me? I stay behind. A lot of hard work went into making that film. May as well pay my respects. She shrugged. I think about halfway through the credits, I clumsily ask this girl if she goes to movies alone often. After a long, silent pause, I started to kick myself for being such an embarrassment, but then she finally said, yeah, but this time wasn't by choice. Eve finished Charlie's sentence then, as if the memory were playing out right there in the dingy motel room. Eve kept talking. Somebody stood me up. Somebody stood you up? Charlie replied. Dang, they must be important. What's their deal? Eve shrugged. He's in a worship band. Lead guitar? Eve shook her head. Mallet percussion. What's that? Xylophone, triangle, marimbas. Eve gave a half shrug, looked back, and met Charlie's eyes again. Damn, said Charlie. You must be devastated. Eve almost smiled. Chetley's a winner for sure. Way too good for me. Wait, Chetley? That's his name? You're fucking with me. Hey, don't be mean. No, I'm not. It's a good name. I just didn't picture it for a mallet percussionist. Eve snorted. Charlie added, anyways, I gotta run. But if you ever want to go to the movies with friends... Charlie paused, mimed reaching into her pocket, pulling out a business card. That's my number. Breaking character, Eve said. That was smooth. She thought back to that day they met. Charlie handing her a Charlie's portrait photography business card. She still remembered the texture of the engraved font on her fingertips, the smell of movie theater popcorn, the way the cleaners had started wandering the aisles before the credits finished rolling, and the way Charlie's crooked smile, even back then, made her heart skip a beat. And Eve pushed up from the bed, strode over, wrapped her arms around Charlie, and hugged her tighter than she ever had before. Her Charlie. For a moment, all the strange occurrences of the day seemed trivial again, overblown. Almost. Soon after, they were cuddling on the bed, watching a cable rerun of the Maltese Falcon. Between midnight infomercials and prosperity televangelists, this was by far the best choice. But around the time Bogart went to Cairo, Charlie dozed off. Eve, calmer but still rattled from the day, continued watching, escaping into a different world until, at last, she dozed off as well. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. Eve stirred awake to the sound of a vibrating phone. The TV was still on, soundlessly playing some nature documentary about Venus flytraps. Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. She cast her eyes across the room. It was coming from Charlie's green backpack, a rectangle of blue light seeping through the fabric. Eve glanced at Charlie, still sleeping. She looked at the bedside clock, 3:06 a.m. Who would be calling this late? Quiet, Eve slipped free of Charlie's arms, crept out of bed, and wandered to the bag. She dug through it, retrieved the phone, and on the screen, Eve Palmer calling. Accept, decline. Eve's stomach dropped. Somebody had her phone. Back at the house? She glanced over at Charlie, considered waking her, but for reasons unknown, even to her, she strode into the bathroom, pulled the door half shut, and tapped accept. On the other end, a voice, shaky, terrified. Eve, are you alone? Charlie's voice. Somewhere at the bottom of Eve's mind, a rising swell of chemical dread burst open like a bloated sack of spider eggs. Countless terrors spawned, each of them swarming a different corner of her thoughts. She opened her mouth to respond, but only a short, stuttering wheeze escaped. Eve, the voice prompted. Is that you? The signal was weak, choppy. Petrified, Eve peered through the cracked open door. Charlie was still in bed, blue light painting the side of her face, peacefully asleep. Eve, the voice that sounded exactly like Charlie rasped. She isn't me, Eve whispered. Who is this? Earlier, when I went to the house, I'm still here. Whoever's with you, she isn't me. And the dog, it isn't Shiloh. Shiloh is... She trailed off. Eve's inner voice screamed. Was this a hallucination? A nightmare? Eve, Charlie continued. It sounded like she was in pain, injured maybe. I don't know where you are, but you need to leave. Never come back to the house. Get as far away as you possibly can and stay away from her. She's going to... Charlie fell silent, sucked in a short gasp of air. Dead quiet. Holding her breath. On the other end, distant footsteps, staggering, uneven, like a drunk walking the deck of a galleon. Getting closer. The sound was accompanied by laughter or crying. Whatever it was, those vague whimpers were muffled, like hands clasped over a mouth. Wom, wom, wom. Closer, 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 until... Beep! The call ended. Eve's fingers trembled, had started to redial when a shadowy form slid into the edge of her vision. Eve turned. There stood Charlie. Or is it Charlie? Looming in the bathroom doorway, a black silhouette outlined by the TV's shimmering glow. Unmoving. "Eve?" Charlie inquired. "Is everything okay?" Her face was masked in shadow, only the slightest glint of her eyes catching light from the bathroom mirror. Still shaky, Eve glanced down at the phone and lied. "Yeah, I was trying to get a hold of the contractor for the inspection. At 3 a.m? Loaded silence. Eve cut it short with another feeble lie. "Yeah, I think apparently the contractor mixed up the dates, told the inspector to come up Sunday instead of Saturday." "Right." Charlie's head tilted, not buying it. "Maybe we can sort this out tomorrow?" I wish," Eve exhaled. "Apparently it's urgent. Like if I'm gonna go deal with it outside. You can go back to sleep." Charlie reached for the light switch, flicked it on. They both squinted, eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness, and that was when Eve finally saw it. On Charlie's left hand, her tattoo, the black triangle on her left index finger, was completely absent. "Eve?" the doppelganger prompted. Stomach twisting, Eve brushed past her, surged toward the door. Unthinking, she grabbed the keys, her wallet, and... "Eve, where are you? I'll be right back." Shoeless, wearing only sweatpants and a t-shirt, Eve rushed outside, slamming the door in her wake. Half running, she hauled across the parking lot and climbed into the truck. As Eve fumbled with the keys, trying to start the engine, Charlie burst out of the room, pulling on her boots, still dressed in her PJs. "Eve, hold on! Eve, what the fuck?" Her face was filled with terrified concern. "She's going to put you in an asylum." That manic whisper, the voice that had replaced Mo, hissed. "You're going to die in a concrete cell. Bash your head against the wall until your skull cracks and your brains leak out." Charlie drew closer, closer, until at last the engine roared to life. Eve shifted into drive and stomped on the gas. The truck squealed to a lurching start, whipped up a hailstorm of gravel, tore across the lot and nearly clipped Charlie in the process. Screeching toward the road, Eve was about to swerve leftward toward Yale, away from the mountain, but... Charlie, the real Charlie, she was still back in that house. Same with the real Shiloh. Eve wasn't abandoning them. She couldn't. She glanced at the rear view. The carbon copy Charlie was still in pursuit, arms waving, pleading, almost weeping. "Stop! Stop! Stop!" Eve ripped through the entrance and veered to the right, barreling back toward the summit. Charlie and Shiloh were everything to her, and she wouldn't leave them behind. That was her family. As she stepped on the gas, her eyes flicked between the road and the mirror. Every time she looked back, the neon blue sign had shrunk farther and farther into the distance. Charlie still running after her. One hand on the wheel, Eve reached into her pocket, pulled out Charlie's phone, and dialed her own number back. One tone rang out, then, "Sorry. Eve Palmer? Can't make it to the phone right now. Please leave a message after the..." "Shit," Eve hissed. She considered calling 911, but best case scenario, they'd throw her in a psych ward. With growing resolve, she constricted her hands around the steering wheel, picking up speed. The dark forest smeared into blurry shadows. Adrenaline coursed through her veins like ice water as everything converged into one singular goal. Save her family. At any cost. Ding! A warning chimed from the dashboard. Refuel now. Fuck.
Doc_C03, ink blots. Description. Excerpt from the book Names Without Faces by Dr. Bjorn Eriksson. Translated from Norwegian. Pareidolia is a psychological phenomenon in which the human mind perceives familiar patterns and shapes within chaotic and/or ambiguous stimuli, clouds, darkness, patterned wallpaper, etc. In short, it is the brain's tendency to interpret abstract stimuli as something meaningful and recognizable. Common examples include seeing animals in clouds, spotting faces on surfaces such as tree bark, and/or perceiving music or voices in white noise. Some propose the high prevalence of this phenomenon is closely related to the fight-or-flight instinct. Footnote: L. Creston, Pareidolia and Predator Detection. Journal of Natural Phenomenon, Volume 3, Number 21, 1978, pages 32 through 33. The quicker a threat is detected, the faster one can react. Therefore, from a natural selection point of view, it can be advantageous to perceive threats where none exist. That vague shape in the dark could just be a rock, or it could be a predator ready to pounce. Better for your brain to assume a predator than to be eaten alive. Notably, the intensity of pareidolia has been directly linked to a subject's level of anxiety. For example, in Rorschach tests, the more distressed a subject is, the more likely they are to perceive faces in the ink blots, threatening faces in particular. Footnote: A. Yao and L. Carson, Beyond Ink Blots, an extensive analysis of Rorschach test interpretations, Psychology and Practice, Volume 12, Number 3, 1987, pages 12 through 16.
Chase. The truck was running on fumes when the white glow of the Chevron station crept into view. Almost there. Eve eased into the lot, peering through her windshield. This establishment, bathed in stark fluorescent light, looked more like a glorified shack than a running business. Not even a shiny corporate buyout could hide its rural roots. The walls, shingled and weather-worn, were coated with rusty license plates from almost every state, even a few from Canada. The gas pumps, a grand total of 2, looked as though they'd been dragged from a 1960s junkyard and resurrected in some dark magic ritual. Huddled trees encircled the lot, like a crowd of school kids gawking at a playground scuffle. Cautious, Eve steered to the nearest pump, shifted into park, and climbed out. The coarse pavement met her sock-covered feet, an instant reminder she'd not put on boots. She pulled out her credit card, but stopped short. A handwritten sign was taped to the card reader. Cash only. Pay inside. Urgent, Eve rummaged through Charlie's truck, muttering to herself. She dug grimy coins out from cup holders and, reaching, stretching, salvaged some crumpled bills from beneath the seats. That should be enough. Cash in hand, she ran across the lot. As she approached the doors, she caught her shivering reflection in the glass. She looked disheveled, downright unstable. Wide-eyed, dressed in socks, sweatpants, and a dirty t-shirt, her hair tangled up like she'd just gone through a wind tunnel. Who gave a fuck? When she pushed through the entrance, a warbling chime announced her arrival, like fanfare trumpets at a sideshow carnival. She weaved her way to the counter, past shelves of neon-colored junk food and cheap booze. Above, buzzing lights hummed with the tenor of bloodthirsty mosquitoes. She rounded a corner and nearly toppled a display of keychains. The clerk, a slender fellow with cow eyes and rosebud lips, blinked at her, wary. His pale, clean-shaven face somehow looked 13 and 30 at the same time. Eve, doing her best to appear sane, ambled up to the counter and smiled. She held out her smattering of dirty coins and mangled bills. Pump number 2. The clerk's eyes flitted to the change, narrowed, like she'd offered up a handful of bottle caps. He looked at her. You want religion? What? Eve stammered. You want regular? He said. I'm sorry? Do you want regular gas? Oh, right. Yes, regular. Get your shit together, Eve. Behind, the door chimed open and heavy boots clacked against tile. Eve didn't look back. How much? The clerk scratched his nose with a dirty fingernail. Eve glanced at the mess of change in her trembling grasp. Whatever this gets me, I'm in a bit of a hurry. The clerk wiped his mouth with the side of his hand and sniffed. You can just put it on the counter. He gestured. I'll count it. When Eve set down the change, a lone quarter dinged off the glass and clanged to the floor, rolling away like it had some greater purpose. As the clerk started counting, Eve went after the derelict coin. It veered around the display of keychains and plunked to a stop at the leather boots of... Eve peered up. A highway patrol officer. A barrel-chested man with a Burt Reynolds mustache and forearms thicker than Eve's neck. She straightened her posture, forced another smile, and held up the coin. Just drop this, she said, the shaky vibrato of her own voice like sandpaper in her ears. The cop's deep-set eyes zeroed in on her sock-covered feet. His brow furrowed. You got no shoes, he observed. Pump 2's good to go, the clerk interjected. $9.57. Grateful for the distraction, Eve hurried to the exit, tucked away the quarter, and chimed out the door. All the while, she could feel the cop's steely gaze lasered to her back. Please don't follow. At the truck, she unhooked the nozzle, twisted off the fuel cap, and started filling the tank. The metal lever was cold against her hand, the slight tremor of gasoline flowing through. The gallon counter ticked up, painfully slow. She glanced at the storefront. Through the barred glass, the cop was buying a pack of chewing gum, making small talk with the clerk. But it's fine. He can't arrest you for not wearing shoes. The clerk frowned at the cop and shook his head. Are they talking about me? What if Charlie called me in as a runaway? Click. The gas pump halted at 3.7 gallons. Hopefully it was enough to get her home. She hung up the nozzle, climbed back in, and turned the key. Just as she rolled to a start, the cop strolled out of the store. Eve maintained a calm and measured pace. Don't draw attention. As she pulled back onto the main road, a childhood memory played in her mind. A televised car chase. High speeds, helicopter cameras. Route 104 was alive with the blare of sirens as 20 cruisers pursued a sky-blue minivan. The van dodged oncoming traffic, careened through red lights, busy crosswalks. A news anchor excitedly narrated every twist and turn, as if he were calling a play-by-play on Super Bowl Sunday. The frenzied chase came to an abrupt end when police herded the van into a backyard swimming pool. It's a miracle no one was killed, said the anchor, suddenly somber. Weeks later, it was revealed the driver had been in the midst of a psychotic episode. Apparently, he believed the government was trying to kidnap him for some kind of thought control experiment. Turned out getting chased by 20 cops didn't exactly quell the delusion. A nagging question lingered. Would that be her fate? A feature in the local news, fleeing from imagined threats? The lead subject of some stupid cop show? A spectacle for the public to pity, to gawk at and say things like, poor thing, if only she'd been right with the Lord. No, this was real. Madness didn't feel like this. There were too many external markers, too many connected threads. She buried the rising doubt and pressed down on the gas. This was real. Headlights beamed through her back window, glared off the rear view. The cop? She let off the gas a bit. 2 quick siren whoops, red and blue flashing lights. Fuck. Hesitant, she hit the turn signal, pulled onto the shoulder, and slowed to a stop. Part of her considered flooring it, but play this cool. You can't save Charlie if you're in handcuffs. She rolled down her window, took a deep breath, let it out. Behind, the cop's door swung open. Boots scraped onto pavement. Footfalls approached at a plodding rhythm. Eve fixed her tousled hair, again doing her best to appear normal. The cop reached her window. "Cue the engine." Eve did as he said. "License and registration." Shaky, Eve reached into the glove box, offered up the requested documents. The cop studied them, flashlight propped on his shoulder. He was chomping away on a wad of gum. Eve, patience waning, said, "Can I ask why I'm being pulled over?" "You can." His dry response hung in the air. Eve repeated herself. "Why did you pull me over?" With a sigh, the cop handed back the papers. "When's the last time you slept, Evelyn?" The use of her legal name caught her off guard. She forgot it was on her license. "Last time I slept?" "That is the question you were asked." "Last night, tonight. I guess technically last night?" "Uh-huh. For how long?" "A few hours. About 6 hours. 2 hours, but..." Silent, the cop hunched forward, swept his light around the cab, peered into the back. He breathed more through his mouth than his nose, as if his sinuses were blocked. Every exhale carried the scent of cinnamon gum and lukewarm coffee. "Where you headed?" he asked. "Home." "Where's home?" "At the summit." "Address?" "Look," Eve smiled through clenched teeth. "I'm in a bit. I need to get... Can we just..." "Address." Eve huffed. "Heritage Lane, 3709. "Any drinks tonight, Evelyn?" The question sounded like an accusation. Eve cleared her throat. "No." "Drugs? Medication?" "No, sir." "Marijuana?" He emphasized the hua part of the word, a vague attempt at some kind of accent. "No pot," Eve said. "Glass?" "Glass?" "Methamphetamine?" "No, sir." He clucked his tongue, stood upright, and patted the roof of the truck. He looked around and hooked a thumb into his belt loop, thinking. "All right, Evelyn Palmer." He gave the truck another pat. "Make sure you get some sleep." "Yes, sir." Thank fucking God. With that, the cop started back toward his cruiser. Eve began rolling up her window, but his radio went off. He stopped in his tracks, adjusted the volume. The signal was choppy, a female cop speaking lingo Eve didn't understand, half the words drowning in radio static. "All bolo, on, run, approx, last." The cop looked back to Eve, grumbled something unintelligible. Stay right there, then started back to his car, likely trying to get a better signal. "Charlie called you in," that voice in Eve's head insisted once more. "You need to run. Run, run, run." Eve's foot drifted toward the gas pedal, her hand to the ignition. Her heart thumped. All sounds merged into a single, high-pitched tone, and then she didn't remember starting the truck. Hell, she didn't even remember setting her foot on the gas. But next thing she knew, she was flooring it, barreling up the mountain faster than she'd ever driven before. She braced for those flashing lights, Those blaring sirens, frantically checking the rear view, but nothing. Maybe that dispatch hadn't been about her after all. She wasn't slowing down to find out. The next 20 minutes of driving blurred into a dissociative mess until she came upon that sharp corner. She barely let off the gas, bending around it, and a woman, no, a child, was wandering across the road. Blue jeans, white t-shirt, navy green boots. On reflex, Eve's foot crushed the brakes, her hands jerking the steering wheel hard to the right. Tires shrieked, rubber burned, light streaked, until all at once, everything came to a fishtailing stop. The truck wobbled on its suspension, creaking back and forth at a slowing tempo. Eve, wide-eyed, sat frozen, still gripping the steering wheel, still processing the fact she'd nearly run over a child. The truck was facing back the way she'd come, headlights pouring a wide sweep over the trees, the asphalt, the double solid lines, and the child. She was about 100 feet away, standing on the right embankment. Suddenly, her arms shot straight out to her sides, wrists hanging limp like she was tied to an unseen crucifix. She held this bizarre pose for 3, 4, 5 seconds, and then her arms dropped. The girl took 3 sudden steps backward and froze again. She spun to face the woods, a mechanical movement, like a soldier pivoting during a march. She swiveled again, now facing Eve. The features of her pale face were drowned out by the brightness of the headlights. Without warning, she broke into a sprint, bolting toward Eve with startling speed. Eve's breath hitched in her throat. She shifted into reverse, was about to floor the gas, get the fuck out of there, but the girl swerved sharply to the right, scrambled up the embankment, and slipped into the woods. Not your problem. Eve set on the gas, reversed into a turn, and continued her way back up the mountain. Not your fucking problem. For the rest of the drive up, she paid a bit more attention to the road. 20 or so minutes later, when she finally reached Heritage Lane, she slowed to another stop. On either side, the trees leaned inward, as if whispering horrible secrets to one another. Eve peered over her shoulder. The red brake lights illuminated the wet asphalt. No cops in sight. Eve considered one last time if this was the best idea. Charlie's warning on the phone played in her thoughts. You need to leave. Never come back to the house. Get as far away as you possibly can. Resolved, she drew in a deep breath, exhaled. She set on the gas and crept ahead. Heritage Lane seemed longer than usual, narrower. At its end, she rounded onto the driveway, crawled upward. The headlights cast shadows into silent trees, shaping branches into crooked hands, shrubs into undulating abominations. And then, bit by bit, the old house loomed into view, outlined by the black-blue sky. Her lights cast a dull glow over its face, like a submarine approaching some deep-sea wreck, untouched for centuries. Vigilant, Eve pulled to a stop at the edge of the yard, turned off the ignition, the lights. All was dark. Absent-mindedly, she reached into the cup holder and wrapped her hand around Charlie's necklace, feeling the cold brass surface against her palm. She tucked it into her pocket. After taking another deep breath, she stepped out. The mountain air was crisp, still. The far-off sounds of howling wind surged through the valley. For a moment, distant sirens echoed. Or was it a pack of coyotes? She trooped forward, sock-laden feet crunching against the frosted yard. Icy, biting. The soil under her feet gave way like a wet sponge. She ascended the porch, unlocked the door, pushed it open, and, despite every bone in her body telling her to run, She stepped into the foyer.
Doc_A06. Names. Description. Transcribed from Psychology and Practice magazine. Title. Esteemed psychologist fired after absurd claims. Draft 2. Trondheim, Norway. February 17th, 1989. Dr. Bjorn Eriksson has been let go from Hvitvel University's Department of Psychology after refusing to back down on outlandish claims. Footnote. Original document had a scribbled note in the margin. Jeg har conducted universitet. De hävdade Dr. Eriksson aldrig hatat ansatt där. Details are still developing, but sources say he began to believe one of his delusional patients was actually experiencing real events. The patient, a 27-year-old male, is said to be suffering from a variation of Capgras syndrome. Capgras syndrome, aka Capgras delusion, is a rare neuropsychiatric disorder in which a person believes that a close family member, friend, or even themselves has been replaced by an imposter, double, or a replica. It is named after the French psychiatrist Joseph Capgras, who first brought the condition to light in 1923. The exact cause is unknown, but it is believed to be connected with a malfunction in the ability to process facial recognition and emotional responses. Often it goes hand in hand with other delusions, including, but not limited to, the belief that one's entire surrounding reality has been replaced. According to our source, Dr. Eriksson became convinced that one of his patients suffering from such afflictions was actually experiencing a real event, that this patient's reality was in fact being replaced with another one entirely, just as the delusion implied it was. Of course, the doctor's endorsement only resulted in a worsening of the patient's symptoms and eventual involuntary admission to the Gala River Asylum. There, the patient is said to have engaged in extreme and bizarre self-mutilation. Footnote. Scribbled margin note. Patienten fjernet sitt egen neglet med omtang. Han var overbevist om at hennes var blitt byttet ut minst en eksakte kopier. Jeg har erfart at han etter å ha fjernet neglet forsøkte å fjerne sin egen tunge, men mislyktes på å gjøre non-intervention. In this case, Dr. Eriksson claims his patient has evidence, proof, that might sway even the most hardened skeptics' minds. Breadcrumbs was the terminology employed, but again, our sources have informed us the so-called proof is nothing more than blurry photographs and obscure online postings. For his part, Dr. Eriksson is a world-renowned researcher in the field of delusional misidentification syndromes. His book, Names Without Faces, has sold over 500,000 copies worldwide and was a finalist for the Brage Prize in Nonfiction. His research has been cited over 5,000 times. At the time of this posting, Eriksson has not responded to our request for comment. We've reached out to the Helsetilsynet, Norwegian Board of Health Supervision, and they've informed us that an investigation into the matter is ongoing. Whether or not Eriksson retains his title of doctor will be determined.
Spiral. Eve drifted into the foyer, the door creaking shut behind her. The house was dark, the walls stained with grainy shadows, and the cold air was quiet, the kind of silence that got under your skin like an itch. She approached the staircase, flicked the nearest light switch, and nothing. She tried another switch. Still nothing. Had the power gone out? She narrowed her eyes. There was just enough moonlight to see. It streamed through the windows, painting dull shapes on the walls, the hardwood. Eve called out, her voice small. "Charlie?" The house murmured in response, a faint churning in the wind. With measured steps, Eve ventured toward the living room and paused in its doorway. Her eyes were drawn to that barren spot above the fireplace. She'd half expected to see the painting from the basement wardrobe, the chocolate lab, staring out at the ominous tree line. But the wall was blank. In fact, she glanced around. Everything was precisely where she'd left it. She tried again. "Charlie?" Nothing. "Shiloh?" She threw a wary glance back toward the foyer. Whispering doubt wormed into her psyche. Was anyone even here? Was this a trap? Was the house trying to drag her back here? Eve ignored these questions. Her legs carried her forward. She glided past the fireplace, stepped into the kitchen, and halted in her tracks. The table was set for 6. Placemats, dinner plates, silverware all laid out with delicate care. The sight triggered Eve to take a reflexive step away, as if she'd happened upon the corpse of a freshly killed animal. Turning, she staggered back into the living room and... Bzzz, bzzz, bzzz. A vibration in her pocket caught her off guard. It was the phone, the one she'd stolen from the imposter Charlie's backpack. Without thinking, she pulled it out. Unknown number calling. Accept, decline. Eve's trembling finger pressed accept. "Eve?" It was fake Charlie. "Eve, are you there?" Eve remained silent. "Eve, please, where?" Fake Charlie stammered. "You can talk to me. Just tell me where you are. Please, Eve ended the call, muted the phone. Slipping it away, she turned back toward the kitchen and... There, at the table, a shadowy figure now sat. Its back was turned to Eve, and its head was craned forward at a sharp angle, slumped like a puppet whose strings had been punitively cut. And it was motionless, not even breathing. Dead? A pounding throb of dread shot through Eve's temples. Every heartbeat screamed, "Danger, danger, danger!" Inching away, she bumped into a side table and... The figure, with a sudden gasp, jolted upright as if forced into position by unseen hands. It sat there, pin straight frozen, for 1, 2, 3 seconds. And then, with arachnid speed, it darted rightward, vanishing into the distant shadows. Its chair teetered precariously in its wake, threatening to topple before settling. The sound of bare footsteps scrambled deeper into the house, smacking a lunatic tempo across hard wood until silence, oppressive and suffocating, returned. Eve glanced to the nearest exit, about to get the fuck out of there, but then... "Eve!" The real Charlie's voice, ragged and wheezing, called out from above. "Eve! Help!" All at once, Eve's emotions whirled into a frantic maelstrom. Her conviction to protect and her instinct to survive battled each other in a vicious back-and-forth street fight. One screamed at her to run up there, do whatever it took to save Charlie, while the other insisted this was all a terrible trick. Flee this house, this mountain, never return. Eve slowed her breath, gritted her teeth, and silenced the inner chaos. No more running. Hands balling into fists, she made her way to the foyer. At the threshold, she poked her head around the corner. All seemed clear, quiet. But as Eve climbed the stairs, another sound bled down from the darkness above. A faint, muffled whimper. "Charlie?" Heart pounding, Eve entered the upstairs corridor, and as soon as her foot met the floorboards, the whimpering ceased. It sounded like it had come from beyond the corner at the hallway's end. Slowly, Eve edged forward and leaned around. The white door that led to Allison's supposed bedroom was half ajar, revealing nothing but a pitch-black void. From within, labored breathing emerged, weak and stuttering. Charlie? Eve's voice trembled. Now, every fiber of her being once again screamed, "Run!" Yet she continued creeping forward, one foot after the other, until she swung the door open wide. Putrid reek wafted out, hitting her like a wall. A stench so powerful, it dredged up a flash jolt memory. As a child, walking home from school, she'd accidentally stepped on a dead sparrow. With a wet squelch, her red gumboot burst the bird's stomach open, unleashing a mess of bleach-white maggots onto the sun-baked sidewalk. The odor was so strong, so foul, she could taste it. Only now, the stench seeping out from that room was somehow worse, more pungent, and someone was standing in the far corner. It was the woman in the hospital gown, the one from the attic. Allison? She was shaking, a strange movement somewhere between laughter and weeping. She took a halting step toward Eve, then another one, another. The movements seemed painful, involuntary. The woman lurched to a halt in the room's center. Now her gaunt arm was visible, cast in a dim wedge of moonlight. Cold blue veins pulsated beneath pale, almost translucent skin. Tendons seethed and spasmed like high-strung tapeworms. And gripped in her gnarled hand, a familiar hammer. The woman's voice, almost childlike, quivered unsteadily. "You have to hide. You have to hide. You have to..." Eve, finally snapping out of her trance, bolted in the opposite direction. She hurtled down the stairs, nearly falling as she made a beeline to the front door. Locked. From the outside? She tried again, yanking back with all her weight. The door didn't budge. Panic mounting, Eve darted to the nearest window, but iron bars blocked her escape. She swiveled around. Every single window was now inexplicably barred. When? How? There was no time to question the logic. Find another exit. With her back to the wall, she slid deeper into the house, straining to listen. Above, all was quiet. Had the woman even followed? Right then, the woman's voice, hushed, leaked down through a ceiling vent, counting. 15, 14, 13. You have to hide. The realization hit Eve with a sick and sudden lurch. This was a game of hide-and-seek. 10, 9. Urgent, Eve cut into the living room. The windows were barred there, too, of course. She lunged for the back door. Locked. Fuck. 5, 4. Her eyes shot to the basement door, wide open, unwelcoming as ever. But 2, 1. Those bare footsteps, unnaturally fast, skittered down the upper hall. They moved with a relentless, mechanical pace, like the staccato strokes of a typewriter. They tapered onto the staircase and... Hide. Now! With no other choice, Eve shot toward the basement, scrambling down into the darkness. Pushing off the stairwell corner, Eve tore leftward, her hand skimming the coarse concrete, guiding her through the devouring black. Overhead, footsteps shuddered into the living room and slid to a halt. Eve could picture the woman, outlined in gray light, hammer raised, head tilted, listening for any sign of movement. Fuck. A knot of terror welled in Eve's chest cavity, expanding like a carnival balloon. She forged ahead, as quietly as possible, until she spilled into an open space. She groped forward, her eyes narrowed, vague shapes forming in the hazy static. Brick pillars, rickety beds, and... a wheelchair? Wait, what room was this? Hide. Ahead, a soft flicker of orange light beckoned. It drew her into a passage so narrow she had to turn sideways to fit. She shuffled onward, face scratching against insulation, until she broke into a small nook. Was this the spot where Jenny had hidden? In the far wall was an olive green door, cracked open, that orange flickering light on the other side. Carved into the door's center, a cryptic glyph, the circle marked with intersecting lines. Eve reached for the knob and hesitated. Something told her it might not be a good idea, but she glanced back down the narrow passage. No footsteps, no stench. Was the woman still upstairs? Either way, Eve pushed through the olive green door and entered a low-ceilinged room filled with dark piles of clutter. Swiftly, she grabbed a nearby rickety chair and wedged it beneath the doorknob. That wouldn't keep anyone out for long, but at least it would make a sound, warn her. She turned back to survey the dim interior. Its low ceiling was intertwined with long, dead tree roots, makeshift support beams holding everything aloft. It seemed more like an abandoned mine than a room. And that orange, flickering glow, its source hidden, struggled to illuminate the space. Eve drifted forward. Aside from a few pieces of old furniture, countless paintings dominated the room. Stacks and stacks of them. They were strewn on the dirt floors, propped against the earthen walls, heaped in the corners. None were hanging. Eve continued to wander deeper. Maybe there was something here that would make sense of all this madness. But they were only paintings, and each one was more or less the same. Depictions of the house, 3709 Heritage Lane, in different contexts. Half-built, fully renovated, abandoned, covered in snow, burned to a crisp. An exceptionally odd one portrayed the windows and doors swarmed with tiny black dots. Had Thomas's mother painted all these? As Eve crept forward, her eyes caught on a painting with people in it. She crouched down for a closer look. It was a family of 4, stiffly posed like American Gothic in front of the house. A severe-looking older couple with 2 children, boy and girl. The father, a bleak smile on his face, was nearly the spitting image of Thomas, right down to his perfect teeth. The mother, red hair tied back in a tight bun, looked one tunic away from joining a nunnery. The daughter looked a lot like Jenny, but she appeared sad, hopeless even. And the boy had Thomas's eyes, his brown hair. This had to be his family, painted when he lived here as a kid. Thomas, his sister, Allison, and their parents. Eve was about to move on, but then she squinted. Young Thomas looked out of place, like he was painted there after the fact by a lesser artist. His dimensions weren't quite right. His arms were just the slightest bit too long, his mouth the slightest bit too wide. Even his texture looked off. Eve pressed the tip of her thumb against his face. His paint felt different from the rest. Cheap, acrylic, cold. Unnerved, she pulled away her hand, leaving behind a pinkish smear where young Thomas's jaw used to be. It looked gory, a mangled, lopsided grin. Turning back, Eve started toward the source of light. She rounded a stack of empty picture frames and came upon a red gas lantern. It was nestled in a corner, hissing and flickering. Eve was too distracted to question who had turned it on. Next to the lantern were 2 wooden crates, stacked on top of each other. Eve glanced over her shoulder, back at that olive green door, listening. No sound. Careful, she knelt down and peered into the first crate. It was filled with painting supplies, brushes, solvents, palettes. She set it aside and looked into the next box. This one was filled to the brim with glossy 4x6 photographs, snapshots of the family from that painting. But here, they looked like different people entirely. Relaxed, happy. The father had a full beard, neck tattoos, and a friendly smile. The mother's red hair was pixie cut short, and her green eyes had an impish sparkle to them. As for the daughter, she had bright green eyes just like her mother, and her bubbly energy radiated a joy that shone in every frame. Eve continued sifting through, picture after picture. Young Thomas wasn't in any of them. Eve lifted one closer to her face, squinted. In this image, the two parents and the daughter were gathered around a campfire. Behind them, a red gas lantern, identical to the one here, cast its warm glow over a checkered picnic table. To the table's left, the father was hunched forward, tuning an acoustic guitar. He wore a baggy black t-shirt featuring a white circle, crisscrossed with lines of differing lengths. The very symbol Allison had allegedly carved into the banister. Below it, Ring of Eyes. Judging by the jagged font, it was some kind of heavy metal band logo. All in all, he looked nothing like a Puritan who, according to Thomas, didn't like hobbies. Eve continued scrutinizing the image. The mother, wearing a black Sabbath hoodie, was taking a swig from a beer, giving a sidelong look at her husband, a loving glint in her green eyes. Standing between the parents was a girl who looked about 14 years old. Allison? With her long black hair and vibrant green eyes, she was the one taking the photo, holding up the camera for a 3-person selfie. She clasped a free hand over her mouth, caught in the midst of laughter. At the trio's feet, blurry and out of focus, a chocolate lab, tail wagging. Buckley? Eve sifted through more. Beach days, metal concerts, hockey games, parties. Why wasn't Thomas in any of these photos? Not a single one. He wasn't even present for the family portraits. Eve dug to the bottom, and her fingertips grazed a crumpled ball of paper. She pulled it out and flattened it against her thigh. It was a note, one that Allison had presumably written to herself, hastily scrawled in black pen. You are not who they say you are. Thomas Faust is not your brother. He has been living, or trapped, here since long before the house was built, before the trees were planted. He changed your memories, warped your family, forced himself into your life. Despite what everyone around you says, your name is not Alina. It is Allison. Allison Faust. Your father is Elijah and your mother is Vera. The religious zealots who replaced them are not real. They are mimics. They may look like your parents, but they are not. Never forget that. Thomas, or whatever force controls him, wants to drive you mad, wants you to stay locked up here forever. He's making you see things, making you doubt your own sanity. What are his motives? He's pulling you into a labyrinth that you might never escape. It's like quicksand. The more you fight the charade, the worse it gets. There's only one way to stop it. You have to play along, wait for the right moment, then make Thomas angry, or afraid. Do something extreme, something that will make his mask slip, make him show his true face. Then you strike. Labyrinth. Eve tucked the letter into her back pocket alongside Charlie's necklace. Again, some variation of Heather's words echoed. Allison thought that killing Thomas was the only way to make it stop, to get her old life back. She stabbed him 37 times in less than a minute. Eve was about to stand when she spotted a trail of ants filing down from a crack in a nearby support beam. They met the dirt floor and veered off, disappearing beyond the lantern's soft halo. all moving with hive-mind purpose. Eve wrapped her grip around the lantern's handle and, joint by joint, rose to her feet. The ant trail led her farther into the space, the jittery light unveiling more with each step. She rounded a precarious tower of paintings and came upon a bizarrely out-of-place hallway. White tile flooring and pale green walls, like a hospital hallway. This corridor stretched for a seemingly impossible length, the ants marching over the linoleum, everything receding into blackness. Leery, Eve drifted forward, her nostrils assaulted by the stench of bleach and cleaning chemicals. The ants lured her farther down the narrow hall. Ahead, a mechanical clicking sound echoed, like an off-rhythm turn signal. Tack, 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 tack. Mo? The hillbilly chimp sat in the center of the hall, rocking back and forth as he maniacally banged his plastic cymbals. The ants veered around the toy like water around a rock, kept marching off into the darkness beyond. Absent-mindedly, Eve went over, squatted down, and picked Mo up. White fur, blue felt overalls, a frayed straw hat peppered with holes. This was her, Mo. Right down to every last dent, scratch, and blemish. Unthinking, she switched him off, set him down, and continued forward until the lantern's glow revealed, standing about 10 feet away, Charlie. Eve froze. This looked nothing like the Charlie she knew. The Charlie who'd stepped back into the house to grab a few things. Now, her clothes were tattered and frayed, like they'd endured years down here, decades even. And her skin was autopsy pale, drained of any life. Her eyes were gently shut, as if she were asleep while standing. The ants circled her bare feet, hundreds, maybe thousands. A macabre procession fanning out like a slow spinning vinyl. Somehow, it seemed like this Charlie had been here for centuries, like she was part of the house itself, fused to the ground, silent, waiting. Finally, Eve managed a hushed, Charlie? Charlie's eyes remained shut, almost serenely so, but her lips peeled back with a wet sound, her mouth forming into a pained grimace, blood-red gums and glistening teeth exposed. And then, with alarming speed, the encircling ants were upon her. They swarmed up Charlie's legs, her torso, fingers, arms, rising like a coat of liquid metal. Eve clamped a hand over her own mouth, as if that might stop the scene from unfolding. But the nightmare spectacle only accelerated. Eve staggered backward and held in a gasp as the ants, with relentless fervor, wedged themselves between Charlie's eyelids, into her nostrils, mouth, squirmed their way through the crevices of her gums and teeth. All the while, Charlie remained eerily still, unfazed by the chaos. The invading ants moved faster and faster until only one remained, bloated and wriggling, stuck between Charlie's two front teeth. Its needle-thin legs kicked and writhed until it slipped through with an audible schlick. Charlie's eyes snapped open wide, mystified, as if she'd just woken from a horrible dream, only to realize reality was so much worse. Her bewildered gaze met Eve's, and then she whispered, What are you doing here?" Eve, barely able to think, started to respond, but Charlie cut in. "Eve, you're not supposed to be here yet. You..." Mid-sentence, Charlie froze, her bloodshot eyes fixating on something over Eve's shoulder. Eve glanced back, but nothing was there. "She's almost..." Charlie stammered in breathless terror. "She's almost here. You have to hide." Charlie spun on her heel, shot off down the hallway, hooked rightward. Eve lingered for a moment, her hesitation cut short by that maggoty stench of decay. Behind, the unsteady shuffle of footsteps echoed through the painting-filled chamber. Soft whimpers, that woman's childlike voice repeating the same word again and again. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Until she loomed into view at the hallway's entrance, still wielding the hammer. Fuck this! Eve turned heel and followed Charlie's footsteps, sprinting through the corridor. She veered rightward, the lantern slipping from her hand, crashing to the tile with a shrill crack. As Eve took another sharp turn, she glanced back, just in time to see the woman approaching at a languid pace, undeterred by the spreading flames of the shattered lantern. Her face, an image that etched itself into Eve's retinas, was exposed by the dancing glow, undulating shadows bleeding upward. Her skin was pulled tight, every contour of her skull harshly pronounced, as if the bones might burst through in a blood-soaked mess. And her eye sockets were so deep, so emaciated, it looked like her bulging eyes might fall out if she were to lean too far forward. But even in the dim light, even in the brief glimpse, the vivid green of the woman's irises was unmistakable. Eve, profoundly regretting her choice to look back, careened forward, turning corner after corner through an endless labyrinth. At some point, those hospital walls and white tiles gave way to concrete and hard-packed dirt. If not for a few rays of sparse light leaking down through the floorboards above, it would have been pitch dark. Eve kept running and running until she slammed through a bone-white door and tumbled into a small room, nearly face-planting against black and white checkered tile. She jolted to her feet, whipped the door shut, and fumbled for the lock. But there was none. Fuck! She scanned the darkness, hunting for something to bar the door, a place to hide, a weapon, anything. But she could barely see. All the while, those bare footsteps, that grating whimper, drew ever closer. Eve grasped her hands along smooth brick walls until she bumped into a solid object, wooden and splintery. A shuttered wardrobe. She clambered inside, yanked the door shut and held it there. Breathe in, breathe out. Her heart thumped a frenzied rhythm against her ribcage. Cold sweat trickled down her brow, stung her eyes. And from the corridor, those dragging footsteps came closer, closer, and just before the room's white door swung open, Eve gulped in a sharp breath, held it. Eve peered out through the wardrobe slats. There, in the doorway, stood the hospital-gowned woman, framed by the scant light, hammer still in hand. Don't breathe. Be quiet. The woman loomed into the room, weeping a grief-filled moan, a warbled pitch that rose and fell into dead quiet. She circled the space like a caged animal. Eve, desperate not to make a sound, continued holding her breath. Her lungs burned. Pins and needles pricked her face, and the woman wandered the room, seconds stretching out like minutes until finally she lumbered to a stop, turned for the exit, and staggered away, one painfully slow step at a time. Eve's inner voice screamed, "Don't breathe! Don't you fucking breathe! Just hang on a little longer," but Eve's lungs forced her to suck in air, a short gasp. The woman froze in the doorway. Then, with a slow, ratcheting movement, she looked over her shoulder, directly at Eve. Dim light glinted off the woman's unblinking eyes. 2 white flecks surrounded by an ocean of black. It was like she could see into Eve's thoughts, feel Eve's terror. Like she was trying to tell Eve something without speaking a word. Suddenly, a cascade of fractured images and memories invaded Eve's brain like a swarm of sightless bugs. Not her own memories, Allison's memories. An entire lifetime condensed into a rapid-fire slideshow. So vivid, so intense, Eve could almost hear it, see it. As if the memories were playing out right there in the shadows of the wardrobe. Scene after scene. Young Allison, an only child, with her parents from the photographs all those years ago, settling into the house. Fleeting moments from better times. Allison's father teaching her to play the guitar, guiding her fingers along the fretboard. Allison stumbling as she learned to ice skate on a frozen pond. Patient parents helping her to stand. Allison's mother bringing home a chocolate lab puppy. Then, on a bright summer day, a strange boy wandering out of the woods. A lost child. Young Thomas. From that moment on, Allison's world began its terrible transformation. First, the changing furniture, then the walls, the rooms of the house, the people. Allison's once loving, laid-back parents shifting into abusive zealots, religious fanatics. Allison's life rapidly spiraling into a convoluted hell that only she could recognize. Worst of all, her parents beginning to act as if it was Thomas who had always been their son, and Allison who had wandered from the woods, an outsider, a lost child. All of this mounting dread culminating in that terrible epiphany, Allison realizing the only way to escape this miserable reality was to... A familiar image cut in. A moonlit room, a gaunt hand, white knuckles gripped around a silver-tipped fountain pen, soundlessly stabbing into pallid flesh, up and down, again and again, faster and faster. Darkness. A pale blue dot beginning to form in the distance. Allison, soaked in blood, scrambling through the night, pushing through branches, weaving through trees. Behind, voices calling out, shouting, searching. White ceilings, pockmarked. Cold light. Thin wrists strapped to a bed, thrashing. Shrinks, nurses, all glancing at Allison, repressed fear in their eyes, as if she might lunge for them, rip out their throats. Even her own parents kept their distance. The way they looked at her, the way they looked at their own daughter, the numb shock in their eyes, the pity. A child's voice screaming, "My name isn't Alina! My name isn't Alina! My name isn't..." Rising louder and louder until, at last, the hallucinatory nightmare ceased. Eve gasped, thrown back into the present, catching her breath. Her eyes darted to the doorway. Allison was still standing there, face hidden by shadows. But now, the sight of her filled Eve with crushing empathy, sorrow even. Slowly, Allison drifted to the room's center. She hunched forward and, almost reverently, set down the hammer on the black and white tile. She pushed herself off her knees and withdrew, pulling the door gently shut in her wake. Total darkness returned. Again, Eve waited there, hiding in the shadows, paralyzed, lost. Minutes dragged by like hours until more footsteps. But these were a calm, steady gait, padded as if made by sock-covered feet. Outside the room, a light flickered on, casting a thin sheet of yellow glow from beneath the crack of the door. 2 columns of shadow approached until the door clicked open, swinging wide. An incandescent glow framed the silhouette of a man, tall and broad. He lingered there, a black outline, staring into the room. And then he flicked on a switch. Cold light flooded the space. It was Thomas, clad in an olive green sweater and light brown corduroys. But he appeared slightly younger, those gray hairs once speckled around his ears now completely gone. His tired visage scanned over pinkish brick walls until he zeroed in on the shuttered wardrobe. For a second, Eve thought Thomas had seen her, caught the glint of her eyes, but he sighed, started to reach for the light, and his gaze stopped on the hammer. He cocked his head. How did that get there? Frowning, Thomas strode over, squatted down, and lifted the tool. He narrowed his eyes, studying the hammer, puzzled. Then, with a shrug, he rose to stand and strode for the exit. Just before the threshold, he hung the hammer on a brown pegboard. There, it joined dozens of other tools. He flicked off the light and slipped out, pulling the door shut behind. Once again, Eve was alone in the shadows, ablaze with questions. Questions she feared had no answers, or at least no answers she could comprehend. Again, she waited, listening as Thomas's soft footfalls receded, faded around a corner, and silence returned. Find Charlie. Find Shiloh. Get out of here. Eve didn't remember exiting the wardrobe. Next thing she knew, she'd glided across the room and cracked open the white door. Just a sliver. She peered out with one eye. It wasn't a concrete labyrinth that greeted her, nor was it a greenish-white hospital hallway. No, that would have made too much fucked-up sense. Rather, it was the basement corridor, cast in a soft, incandescent glow. The same hallway she'd crept down when searching for hide-and-seek Jenny one night ago. One night? Somehow that felt like weeks ago, months even. And now this previously unfinished hallway was midway through an extensive renovation. Laminate flooring, unpainted drywall, pothole lights. Eve was about to step forward, but something nagged at the corner of her vision. The hammer, still poised on the brown pegboard, seemed to beckon her. That empty voice, the faceless substitute for Mo, whispered, "You have no idea what's waiting for you upstairs. Surely you don't want to face it unarmed and defenseless now, do you?" Eve swallowed her reservations and stepped out of the room, hammer in hand. Home. With her back to the unpainted drywall, Eve inched down the corridor. Overhead lights hummed a shrill note, and soft footsteps mulled about. Eve tilted an ear to the stucco ceiling and discerned several different gates, all unhurried, meandering. She tightened her grip on the hammer, inched up to a corner, and dared a glimpse around. Another narrow hallway, familiar but renovated. It led to a slice of carpeted room, bathed in warm light. After a few more seconds of waiting, listening, she eased forward, up to the room's precipice, and paused there, taking it all in. This was the garage-sized space, the one that, only the day before, had been concrete, covered in dust and lined with rickety shelves. Now it was a fully finished games room. Beige carpet, forest green walls, sports-themed beanbag chairs planted around an unfinished game of Scrabble. In the far corner, framed vinyls hung above an air hockey table. AC/DC, Black Sabbath, Slayer. In the other corner, a Portland Winterhawks jersey and some hockey trophies were on display behind a granite minibar. Above, a squealing groan. Something heavy dragged across hardwood. A couch? The grating pitch rose higher and higher until... silence. Okay. Every step deliberate. Eve crossed the games room and peered into the next hallway. Its yellow walls were adorned with black and white nature photography. Laminate flooring stretched to a darkened staircase. Without making a sound, Eve reached the bottom of the stairs and began her ascent. She skirted around the stairwell corner and slowed. In the blackness above, a thin rectangle of light leaked through the door's outline. From beyond, a murmur of voices trickled down, muffled and indistinct. Clinking glasses, laughter. A dinner party? Eve hesitated, but... Find Charlie. Find Shiloh. Get the fuck out of here. As Eve continued climbing, that outline of light drawing closer, the smell of sirloin steak, mashed potatoes, and gravy filled the air. Still gripping the hammer, she cracked the door, gazed into the living room, and, of course, everything was different. Everything was decorated like a 1950s American dream house. Minimalist furniture, blue-green patterned wallpaper, mahogany hardwood floors. Everything quaint and suffocatingly nostalgic. If not for the flat-screen TV hanging above the fireplace, Eve might have thought she'd been transported back in time. Her eyes flicked to a hanging clock. 7:39 p.m. Out of view, in the kitchen, familiar voices. Paige, Thomas, and their children. Eve, keeping quiet, hidden, slid from the basement, crept a couple of steps closer, and listened in. Maybe she just went out for a walk, a nasally voice suggested. Newton? It's freezing out there, Paige's chirping voice retorted, sounding more irritated than concerned. Thomas, why don't you go check downstairs again? Thomas replied with a reluctant sigh. As you wish. The feet of a chair squealed over hardwood, a short scrape. Heavy footsteps started across the kitchen, toward the living room, and at the last second, Eve stole away into the foyer, soundless. Her feet patted across black and white tile as she surged to the front door, reached for the knob, and... still locked. From the outside. She faced the nearest window and... still barred. Thomas caught her by the arm, spun her around, and muttered, Where are you going? Eve tried to wrench away, but Thomas constricted his grip, vice-like. With his free hand, he yanked the hammer from Eve's grasp and held it out of reach. The hell are you doing with this? He seethed, his voice barely above a whisper. Eve, trapped in a state of slow-motion shock, attempted to speak, but only a wheezing breath escaped. She was torn between the impulse to flee, the urge to grab that hammer back, and... it's like quicksand. The more you fight the charade, the worse it gets. With a low sigh, Thomas pulled Eve into the hallway, tightening his already crushing grip, sending a dull ache up her arm. He glanced over his shoulder, making sure they were alone. I don't know what's going on with you, he said, but I need you to listen to me. He stared into her eyes, his expression severe. You have to get yourself together, or I'm calling the ward again. Do you understand, Emma? Emma? His breath catching, he added, The kids, they can't have their aunt running around the house like a lunatic. Eve met his stare with bewildered eyes. Emma? Their aunt? Finally, she managed to speak. What the fuck is this? Ignoring the question, Thomas took a new tack, smiled sadly. You're my sister. Sister? I'd do anything to help you. He paused. But this, having you stay with us, this is your last chance, okay? I can't put my family safe. Thomas stopped himself. Did he mean to say safety? He continued. I can't put my family's stability at risk anymore. Do you understand? Thomas kept talking, but his words blurred into the background. Wom, wom, wom. Whatever he was saying, his performance was so convincing, it sent a pang of doubt into Eve's psyche. Was she truly delusional? Was she actually his sister? Was her name actually Emma? No, that wasn't how hallucinations felt. Not how insanity worked, right? He was toying with her. This was his game, just like what happened to Allison, but no, that would make even less sense, and that terrible voice of nothingness murmured into Eve's ear. She could almost feel its cold breath brushing at the nape of her neck. Maybe Allison's note was right, it said. Maybe Thomas has lived here since before the house was even built, before the trees were planted. Maybe he wandered out of the woods in the light of day. And maybe, just maybe, the only way to stop this is to... Shaking off the intrusive thoughts, Eve sharpened her focus. Bide your time. Play along until you find the right moment to escape. Come back with help. Rescue Charlie. Rescue Shiloh. Don't provoke Thomas. Not yet. Somewhere deep within, she clung desperately to the wild hope that there was still, somehow, a logical explanation for everything. A practical way to escape, but... Emma? Eve met Thomas's gaze. He'd asked a question she hadn't heard. He repeated himself. What were you doing with the hammer? He presented the tool as if it were something Eve had attempted to steal. She forced out an excuse. I just wanted to hang some paintings. In the middle of dinner? Eve nodded gently. Just play along. Thomas studied her, skeptical. You've been keeping up to date on your meds, right? Eve nodded again. Okay. Thomas took a deep breath and released her arm. All right. Absent-mindedly, he set the hammer onto a cherrywood side table and rubbed his jaw with a knuckle. Eve sensed he was almost forcing himself to believe her. Again, he deserved some kind of award for this performance. Now, Thomas continued, we would love for you to rejoin us at the table. The kids are a little spooked, but we can show them everything is okay. Tell them their aunt was just looking for something in the basement and got distracted, all right? Eve swallowed. All right. Thomas reached out and held her gently by the shoulders. She fought back the urge to recoil and faked another smile instead. Thomas smiled too. That same charismatic smile from when she'd first seen him, standing on her doorstep only one night ago. A complete stranger. Suddenly, Eve noticed an absence of pock-marked scars on his face and neck. The ones Allison had supposedly inflicted with a silver-tipped pen. Before Eve had a chance to process what this meant, we love you, Emma. Thomas's voice cracked with dreadful sincerity. You're a part of this family. I know it doesn't feel that way sometimes, but you are. He paused, letting that sink in. Whatever you're going through, he went on, you'll come out on the other side. You've gotten through worse. I know it's scary. Big changes always are. But we're all pulling for you. Paige included. The only response Eve could muster was a pitiable, thanks. Now, Thomas smiled again. Let's get back to dinner.
Doc_A07, RIP. Description: Obituary of Elijah Faust, transcribed from a copy of the Yale Courier. Elijah Faust, 67, passed away at Yale Hospice this Sunday, date redacted. He was born on, date redacted, at St. Vincent Hospital in Portland. As a teenager, he played center ice for Cedar High School's Red Owls. In the, date redacted, State Hockey Championship, he steered the team to second-place victory. After an injury on the rink, Elijah embraced his passion for music. At Reed College, he secured a BA in music theory and a minor in business. After graduation, he started the metal band Ring of Eyes, in which he played lead guitar and sang backup vocals. That same year, he founded Faust Guitars in Yale. It was there he met and later married his wife, the late Vera Krause. Together, they purchased a home on Stray Dog Summit and started their family. Elijah is remembered as a loving father and devoted husband who will be deeply missed by all who had the pleasure of knowing him. He is survived by his daughter, Allison Faust.
Family troubles. With Eve in tow, Thomas returned to the kitchen. The rest of his family was planted around Eve's dinner table, acting like it was their own. Paige, Jenny, Newton, and Kai, all dressed in Sunday casual. They stared at Eve as if she was the one who didn't belong. Thomas lingered at the kitchen's threshold. "Your auntie was in the foyer," he explained, patting Eve on the back like a car salesman touting an obvious lemon. He pulled up a chair and motioned Eve to sit. She remained standing, anchored to the floor, still processing the absurd sight before her. "Emma?" Thomas nudged. Eve clenched her jaw, put on another smile. Play along. She wandered over and sat. Thomas's eyes flitted to his children, then back to Eve. "Did you want to tell the kids what happened?" He sat down next to Paige. Eve surveyed the family's faces. Just like Thomas, everyone was performing their roles perfectly, right down to the most minute details. Jenny, blinking wide, her tiny hands gripped tightly around a plastic juice cup. Newton, avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Kai, more impatient than afraid, tapping his fingernails against a plate. An aggravating ting-ting-ting, ting-ting-ting rhythm. And Paige? Paige was just about glaring into Eve's very soul, as if she wanted to rip it out and cast it straight into the fires of hell. Stay focused, Eve. Play along. I was just looking for some tools to hang some paintings up, Eve lied. Thomas gave a single nod. Good enough. The kids nodded too, slightly calmer, but Paige kept glowering. She wasn't buying it. Right then, Shiloh trotted in from the living room, not a care in the world. Eve's heart skipped a beat, but the dog ignored her, went straight to Thomas's side, sat and stared up at him, eyes big, tail wagging. "Good girl." He reached down and scratched Shiloh behind the ears. Her tail wagged faster. He leaned back, the dog still gazing up, eyes locked on his plate of steak now. "Shiloh," he chided, "no begging." Fake Shiloh barely turned away, eyes still glued to Thomas's dinner. "Go to your bed." Thomas pointed into the living room. Reluctant, the dog started to slink away, but upon noticing Eve, she froze, tensed up, and whined. "Emma's okay, Shiloh," Thomas hushed. "You know her." The dog slinked out of the room, tail between her legs. Thomas looked to Eve.
"She'll warm up to you one of these days."
Unblinking, Eve nodded. Uh-huh. A sharp gust of wind slammed against the barred windows and the house lights flickered. Thomas looked outside, shaking his head.
"These storms get worse every year."
He clicked his tongue, turned back.
"Hopefully the power holds out."
Paige wrapped her fingers around the handle of a serrated knife. "Your auntie will be moving out soon, kids." She cut into her steak, red oozing from the veins of the undercooked meat. Kai and Newton offered uninterested mumbles in response. Jenny just sat there, eyes on Eve, head tilted, as if she could sense something was off, but couldn't put a finger on it. Then Jenny narrowed her gaze and said, Auntie Emma?" Eve wasn't sure how much longer she could keep this charade going. "Play along," that nothing voice demanded. "Yes, Jenny?" Eve said. Jenny scratched her nose. "What happened to your tattoo?" "I'm sorry?" Eve had never had a tattoo in her life, never even had a fleeting interest in getting one. She was far too indecisive to do something so permanent. Jenny pointed. Your wrist tattoo," she said. "It's gone." Eve looked down at her own wrist, bare skin.
"Jenny," Thomas interjected, "your aunt never had a tattoo."
Jenny furrowed her brow. "Oh?" Thomas chuckled.
"Looks like somebody's got a case of the gets."
He went back to eating, unconcerned. But Jenny kept her eyes on Eve's wrist, still skeptical. Kai, mouthful of food, interjected.
"You're going crazy, Jembug." He poked her shoulder. "We're gonna have to throw you in a loony bin, just like—"
"Kai," Paige hissed. "Enough." But Paige was too late. Jenny's eyes were already wide with renewed fear. I'm crazy?" Newton, sounding slightly more confident than Eve remembered, swooped in to save the day.
"You're probably just getting mixed up with the time we went to the fair, Jenny."
Jenny blinked at him. "What?" Newton pushed up his glasses with a thumb.
"When we all got those wash-off tattoos."
"Oh," Jenny nodded. Somehow that seemed to calm her down, if only a little. She went back to her food. As everyone carried on eating, Eve's eyes locked onto a speck of dirt stuck to her placemat. All sound droned into white noise until...
"Emma!"
Paige chimed. Eve looked up. Paige blinked at her, expecting an answer to yet another question Eve hadn't heard. "You were going to explain your reasoning," Paige prodded. "For moving out?" "Oh." Eve cleared her throat and turned to the kids. Silent, they awaited her answer. Eve struggled to come up with a lie. "I just think it's time for me to be on my own. Get out of the house. Feels like the right thing."
"Well," Thomas jumped in, "you'll certainly be missed. But I think we can all agree, change is an opportunity in disguise."
He looked around the table, almost like he expected applause. Crickets. He went back to eating. Paige, her tone apathetic, looked at Eve and recited, "We stand behind you, 100%. You've already come so far." Eve managed to fake yet another smile. She didn't know how many more she had left. Hell, at this point she was just about ready to flip the table and start breaking shit until they told her where Charlie was, showed her the nearest exit to this upside-down nightmare, and So, Paige took a sip of water, ice cubes clinking in the glass. How goes the apartment search? Eve hesitated, then lied again. It's going okay?
Well, that's good,
Thomas remarked, as if the topic required no further discussion. He turned to his daughter and abruptly shifted the subject.
How was school this week?
Jenny gave a little shrug, poked at her food. I don't know.
Wow, you don't know? That's a first,
Thomas teased. Jenny smiled, sheepish. Thomas leaned forward.
You gotta tell me one thing that happened, he said. Just one thing, that's all I ask.
Jenny laughed a bit. Okay, there was this dog in class on Friday.
A dog?
Said Thomas with exaggerated surprise.
What's a dog doing in a school?
It was a seeing eye dog, Jenny replied, bashful. Thomas quirked an eyebrow and pretended he wasn't familiar with the concept.
A seeing eye dog?
It's a dog that... It helps blind people walk around. Jenny beamed.
Wow, a professional dog.
Jenny tilted her head. What's that? She asked.
Professional?
Yep.
It's when you get paid for your work.
Oh, Jenny shook her head. I don't think the dog gets paid.
Well,
Thomas wiped his mouth with a napkin.
It should.
Maybe with treats, said Jenny, sincere. Thomas chuckled, glancing over at Eve, the way a proud parent did, his eyes filled with, "Isn't she cute?" For a moment, Eve almost forgot everything else that was going on, as if this bizarre facade was somehow just a typical family dinner. But then Paige cut in, killing the mirage. "Emma, what about your friend in the city?" Eve jolted back to the present. "What?" Paige gulped down another mouthful of steak. "Your ex, Charlotte. Does she still own that apartment in Portland?" Of course, Charlie's name is Charlotte here. Thomas cut in.
Paige, I don't think they're...
I'm just saying. Paige threw up her hands, striking a martyr's pose. Maybe Charlotte would help Emma out, considering their past. Thomas shook his head, holding back.
We can figure something else out.
Paige bristled. Heaven forbid I actually try to find a timely solution. Charlotte, my ex in the city. All right. Thomas sprinkled salt over his steak.
We're not doing this right now. If Emma can't find a place, we'll figure something out. And don't feel rushed.
He looked at Eve.
You can always stay a bit longer if needed.
Paige grumbled and got up from the table. Without saying a word, she strode to a nearby cupboard and grabbed a bottle of Eve's favorite red wine. Perusing it for an extra moment, she snagged the corkscrew. Eyes fixed on Eve, she sat back down, twisting the corkscrew into the bottle as another blast of ruthless wind banged against the house. The lights sputtered, a quick succession of tiny blackouts rippling through the room until... darkness. Power outage. If it weren't for the orange glow of the living room fireplace, it would have been pitch black. Thomas released an exasperated sigh.
Great. I'll get the candles.
He pushed himself up from the table and stalked out of the kitchen. His footsteps receded into the foyer, marched up the stairs. All the while, Paige, aglow in the fire's distant light, kept cranking on that corkscrew, glaring at Eve. Then, with a hollow thwop, she popped the cork. Still staring at Eve, she poured until her glass was nearly full, right to the brim. Eve, horrified at the thought of a drunken Paige, opened her mouth to say something, but That was when she finally noticed, around Paige's neck, a brass necklace, adorned with an oval locket. Charlie's necklace? Eve reached into her own pocket. Charlie's locket was gone. She checked her other pocket. Gone. Her eyes snapped back to Paige. That was Charlie's necklace. There was no mistaking it. A flash flood of emotions followed. Confusion, sorrow, fear, rage. The rage started in her temples and spread like fire, setting ablaze her arms, legs, every single extremity. "Where'd you get that?" The words slipped out in a whisper, Eve's voice shaking like a pot about to boil over. Paige looked toward her. "The necklace." Eve gritted her teeth. "Where'd you find it?" Paige gave a slow, bovine blink. "Oh, an antique store." Paige held it up and flicked it open. Empty. "Haven't decided what to put in it yet." She clasped it shut and took a sip of wine. "Why do you ask?" Without thinking, Eve shot to her feet. The table rattled and the room plunged into silence. Paige frowned, confused. The kids froze, gaping up at Eve, eyes wide. "Emma," Paige set down her wine, "is something wrong?" Eve said nothing. "Emma," Paige continued, her words careful, like she was attempting to defuse a volatile bomb. If I said something that upset you, it wasn't my intention. Paige kept blathering on, but Eve wasn't there anymore. She was in the past, memories playing out in her head. Those strange little moments that stood out more and more as time went on. The way Charlie snorted when she laughed sometimes, then laughed even harder out of embarrassment. The way Charlie's face lit up every time she saw a dog stick its head out a car window. The way she wrapped her arms around Eve from behind and nuzzled her chin into her neck as they fell asleep. All these memories played out like they were happening right now. And then, before Eve knew what she was doing, she'd marched over and grabbed Paige with one hand, the corkscrew with the other. Arm wrapped around Paige's collarbone, Eve yanked back, the chair falling with a brittle crash. Time slowed to a standstill. Eve held the corkscrew to the side of Paige's throat. The children screamed. The fireplace crackled. The wind outside howled. But Paige was silent. For the first time since she walked into the house, she didn't have a fucking thing to say. Only quick, terrified little breaths. "Whoa, hold on!" Thomas trod into the kitchen, his face a mask of stupefied shock, hands raised in a placating gesture. Eve whirled Paige around to face him. "Stay right there." Eve had no clue what her plan was, but... "We're okay." Thomas slowed to a tenuous stop. "Everything's okay." Eve, still holding the corkscrew to Paige's neck, hissed, "Where's Charlie?" "Kids," Thomas said, lowering his voice, "go to your rooms. Lock the doors." But his children didn't respond. They just sat there, paralyzed, eyes wide with terror as Eve held their mother hostage. "Now!" he boomed. In a flurry, they sprang from their chairs, scrambled through the living room. Their footsteps faded as they hurried upstairs, doors slamming shut behind them. Thomas took a small step closer, trying to keep his voice steady. "Emma, can we just..." "My name is Eve." "What?" "My fucking name is Eve." Okay. Eve." Thomas's eyes flickered to that corkscrew, still pricked against his wife's neck. Paige whimpered. Thomas looked back up to Eve. "Just let her go, and we can talk about what the fuck happened to Charlie." "To Charlotte?" "Charlie!" Thomas patted the air like a zookeeper calming an escaped lion. "You and Charlotte, you broke up a few years ago. Can you please let Paige—" "Shut the fuck up," Eve hissed, still having no idea what her plan was here. Just tell me what's going on, or—" "Emma, this isn't—" "Thomas," Paige's voice quivered, petrified. "Please." He met his wife's terrified gaze. "Emma's not going to do anything," he insisted. "Emma, listen to me. Charlie, she's okay. We can call her right now. She can talk to you, and—" He started to pull out his phone, but— "Put that down," Eve snapped. Visions of padded cells, straitjackets. Thomas was going to call the ward. "Put it down, now." He ignored her demand, started dialing a number, and— "Drop it!" He obeyed, releasing the phone like it was scorching hot. It crashed to the hardwood. "Emma," he said, "this isn't you. The medications. I know you've been missing your doses. That's what's happening here. Your mind is going through withdrawal, playing tricks with your memories, and—" "Thomas!" Eve yelled so loud it shook the silverware on the table. She lowered her voice. "Thomas, I need you to listen to me. Listen carefully. If you don't tell me where Charlie, my Charlie, is, something really, really bad is going to happen." Paige winced as the corkscrew pricked her skin. "Thomas," she stammered, her body riddled with cold fear. "Just say something." Thomas managed. Charlie, moved back to the city. She's with—" Fake Shiloh growled into the room, back ridged, tail straight. She barked bloody murder, the sound cracking through the air like gunshots. Thomas ignored this and took another cautious step toward Eve. Tried something different. "Emma, listen to me," he said. "I need you to ground yourself. Focus on your senses. Focus on—" Sight. Paige's blonde hair. Thomas's terrified face. The flickering glow of the fireplace. Sound. Shiloh barking. Panicked breath. Howling wind. Smell. Red wine. Floral perfume. Touch. The cold handle of the corkscrew, and— A jolt of biting pain shot through Eve's right thigh. Her body tensed up in a spasm, and she reeled backward, letting go of Paige. She looked down, and Paige had stabbed a steak knife right into her thigh. It was still lodged there, surrounded by a warm blot of spreading red. The sharp pain gave way to a dull, throbbing ache. The dog stopped barking and fled the room. Everything fell silent, slowed into timeless nothing. Eve looked up. Paige was standing in a strange way, like a bowling pin about to lose balance. What happened? That's when Eve realized the corkscrew was gone. Her hands were empty. Paige, slow, timorous, toppled forward and hit the ground with a thunderous wham! Choking, gargling. Eve's eyes darted, searching for an answer, until finally she saw the corkscrew lodged into Paige's throat. Eve shook her head. I didn't mean to. A thin line of dark blood trailed down Paige's neck. It snaked onto the hardwood, forming a pool that reflected the fire at a crooked angle. Paige's mouth slowly opened and closed, like a fish on land, like she was trying to speak, to breathe. I Thomas let out an unbelieving whisper. Paige? Breaking from his trance, he collapsed to the floor over his wife. He held her neck, trying to stop the bleeding. Paige! His voice cracked. Hands clasped around the wound, he stared into her eyes. But she didn't stare back. Her empty gaze just flicked side to side. Left, right, left, right, left. Thomas, desperation growing, pressed harder, but the red seeped out from between his fingers. Eve, with the knife still lodged in her thigh, stumbled backward. Head spinning, leg throbbing, she limped out of the kitchen and into the hallway. This isn't real, she told herself. Paige isn't real. None of this is. But it felt real. More real than anything she'd ever experienced. Every memory she ever had, good or bad, it didn't matter. It all drowned in the suffocating present. Focus. As Eve shambled down the darkened hall, she thoughtlessly yanked the knife from her leg and tossed it. That wasn't a good idea, a small voice told her. Uncaring, running on pure adrenaline, she staggered to the cherrywood side table, snatched up the hammer Thomas had left there. She glanced back and caught one last glimpse of him, still hunched over Paige. One hand pressed to her wound, the other clutching a phone to his ear. Yes, he said. She's hurt. She's bleeding. What? I don't know. 3710 Heritage Lane. Yes, 3710. Wasting no more time, Eve bombed to the front door and tried the handle. Still locked from the outside. She wedged the claw end of the hammer into the frame and wrenched back. Wood splintered and strained. She kept prying, kept pulling, but the door didn't budge. It seemed hopeless. Thomas screamed. Animalistic, steeped with unimaginable grief. Rage. And Eve knew exactly what it meant. Paige was dead. No! 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 His voice dwindled into a strange, guttural moan. His fist slammed into the floor, an impact so heavy the hardwood audibly cracked. More screaming, thrashing. He was breaking things, tearing apart the kitchen. Wrathful. Eve pried on the door, harder and harder, but it remained steadfast. Emma! Thomas boomed, his voice filled with murder. Fuck the door. She tore the hammer free and scrambled upstairs. Thomas stormed into the foyer just in time to see her disappear at the top of the steps. Eve pushed off a wall and dragged herself down the hallway, the hammer's weight still in her grasp. Behind, footsteps thundered up the stairs, a quick rising war drum. Eve tried the first door, locked. The next one, locked. Her eyes shot to the end of the hall. Allison's bedroom. Somehow, its light was on. Without hesitation, she hurtled inside and slammed the door shut behind. With her back pressed against it, she scanned the room, again searching for somewhere to hide, something to... Allison. She was standing in the far corner, a brightly glowing gas lantern at her feet. She wore a blood-spattered nightgown. Her head was slumped, and her left hand clutched a green fountain pen. She was shaking, sobbing. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Without warning, the door burst open, and Thomas slammed into Eve like a freight train. He thrust her against a barred window and jammed a broad forearm across her throat, crushing her windpipe. He stared into her eyes, silent, possessed by rage. As Eve struggled to breathe, she looked to the far corner. Empty. Allison was gone. Had she even been there to begin with? Eve's blurring vision flicked back to Thomas. We trusted you, he snarled, cold spit spraying her face. With his free hand, he clutched her by the hair, jerked her head forward, and smashed it back into the bars. We accepted you into our home. He slammed her head again, harder this time.
Pounding pain. Again, each impact heavier than the last. Vision fading, heart lurching. This was it. Eve was going to die. This was... Fight. Back. With one last burst of strength, she kneed him in the stomach, a sharp jut. He wheezed, stumbled backward, and crumpled to his knees, winded. Eve caught her balance, gasped in air, barely conscious. Thomas looked up, readied himself to attack, and Eve swung the hammer, claw-end first, into the side of his face. It lodged into his jaw with a deafening crack. Still on his knees, Thomas stared up at her in disbelief, the hammer still stuck in his face, Eve still grasping its handle. He hadn't thought she was capable of this. Neither had she. Their eyes locked for a strange, soundless moment, and then she planted her foot onto his chest and, with both arms, all her strength, wrenched back. The hammer tore open his cheek with a sickening, wet squelch. His perfect teeth ripped out and clattered to the floor in a bloody mess. He crumpled over, blood leaking down his jaw, over his neck, the torn flap of his cheek hanging open, dangling. Horrific. But Eve wasn't finished. Slowly, she raised the hammer, tensed up, and Thomas began to sob. Pitiful, lilting whimpers poured from his mouth and filled the room like a noxious cloud. He was grasping at his face now, as if trying to put himself back together. Red surged through his fingers, branching paths trailing down his forearm. His whimpering grew more panicked, more desperate. He sputtered, hardly legible, drooling ropes of blood onto the floor. "Please, please don't. Emma, please." And all the while, Eve just stood there, hammer raised, readying herself to finish the job. This is the only way to escape, right? Yet, she faltered. Despite all her fear, all her determination, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Paige was an accident. Eve was no killer. And the man writhing beneath, begging for his life, was no eldritch monster. He was just a man, flesh and bone, terrified and breakable. Eve lowered her arm, the blood-soaked hammer slipping to the floor with a dull clink. "Get out of here." She staggered back to the hallway, stepped out and started to pull the door shut, as if that flimsy barrier might keep the horrors within at bay. But at the last second, Thomas's eyes snapped up. "Where are you going, Eve?" His mouth twisted into a mangled grin. Eve yanked the door shut and held it. Why the fuck did he call me that? Dreadful silence. Only the muted hiss of the gas lantern. Focus. Get out of here. Eve's mind raced. She backed away from the door and... the attic. The square window. Maybe, just maybe, get to the roof. Find a way down. She turned on her heel, ankled down the hallway, pulled down the attic stairs and climbed. Pain clawed at her wounded thigh with every limping step. All the while, the door to Allison's bedroom remained shut. Not even a footstep on the other side. Did Thomas pass out? Eve hoisted herself up and hauled toward that narrow passage. The attic, she faintly realized, was mostly empty now. Sparse clutter receded to the flanks. Keep moving. Ignore the pain. Lightheaded, she stumbled into the corner room and, thank the Lord above, the window wasn't barred. She unlatched it, shimmied herself up and through. A tight fit. Cold winter air. Snow-covered shingles. Twisting her way out, a hand clutched her by the ankle and heaved her back inside. Her body dragged across the splinter-ridden floor, chin first. She spun around just in time to see the moonlight glisten off Thomas's torn-open face. He lunged onto her, wrapped his powerful hands around her throat, constricted. "Evelyn Patricia Palmer!"
He boomed like a mad apostle, blood slobbering onto her face. "We gave you life!" Eve reached up, grabbed his wrists, tried to pull them away, but it was no use. His grip was too strong. He squeezed tighter. A lump formed in her throat, swelling, threatening to burst. "We were here when the light of day was born!" She couldn't breathe. Again, she was fading, shadows crawling from the corners of her eyes. Everything becoming nothing. Thomas lowered his voice to a spitting whisper. "We sowed the forest." Right then, a shiny glint caught the corner of her eye. She looked over. Universal tire chains. She reached, stretched, wrapped the tips of her fingers around the cold metal and... "We built the foundations of the..." She swung. The chains cracked into his temple, his head twisting to the side. A red curtain of blood whipped onto the floor, the wall. Slowly, he turned back to her, and now his gaze was empty, vacant. Blood trailed from his cracked temple into his twitching eye and dripped onto Eve's cheek. His grip loosened. We built when the..." He trailed into more disjointed mumbles. Chains still in hand, Eve shoved him off and pushed up to standing. Thomas tried to do the same, but his limbs betrayed him. He fell back to his knees and looked up at her, half-conscious. He kept trying to talk, only to mutter incoherent nonsense. The house, I didn't, the labyrinth." He kept trying to stand, only to fall back down. Eve circled to get behind him. Between heaving breaths, she demanded, "Where is Charlie?" But Thomas only responded with more meaningless mumbles. I didn't mean, my name isn't..." "Enough." Eve breathed in and, on the exhale, wrapped the chains around his neck. She pulled back. He reached up, pawing, trying to tear the chains away. Futile. She pulled tighter, pressed her knee into his back. He gasped, choking, wheezing. She yanked back even harder. He coughed, a spatter of blood. His efforts to fight fading with each passing second until, finally, "Let him go!" Eve looked up. A young cop stood in the doorway, her hands shaking as she aimed her gun. Behind her, another cop stepped into view, tall and barrel-chested, the same one who'd pulled Eve over before. "Now!" he commanded, unclicking the safety on his firearm. The tire chains slipped from Eve's grip, rattled to the floor. Thomas fell forward, wheezing, and before Eve could put her hands up, she was tackled to the ground. Forced onto her stomach, splinters gashing her skin like paper cuts. Cold handcuffs clasped around her wrists. The cops hoisted her upright. She didn't even speak. She just stared ahead blankly as they led her through the attic, blood loss and exhaustion blurring her awareness. As they dragged her down the upstairs hallway, 2 paramedics rushed past. The cops shoved Eve around a corner. Her fading vision landed on a cracked-open bedroom door. From behind it, Jenny peered out, her green eyes awash with profound dread. The cops, oblivious to the girl, steered Eve down the staircase, into the foyer. Above, a deer antler chandelier was now hanging, framed by a grand stained glass window. They ushered her out the front door, onto the porch. The storm had settled again. The snow was already melting. A gray sun crept up over distant mountains. The sky split down the middle, half night, half day. On the ground, commotion everywhere. Cop cars, an ambulance, red and blue light dancing over the frosted lawn, the surrounding trees. A handful of neighbors were gathered in the driveway. Heather and her supposedly deceased husband, Michael, among them, Cops shouted at them, told them to back up, put away their phones. Eve's gaze swept the onlookers, searching for her Charlie, her Shiloh, but they were nowhere to be seen. As the cops continued guiding Eve across the yard, she saw, standing off at the edge of the forest, Allison, still draped in her off-white hospital gown. But aside from that, she was transformed. Her once skeletal face now radiated life, vitality, and remorse. Allison withdrew into the woods, away from the flashing lights, the chaos, the house. Finally, the gravity of it all came crashing down. Words tumbled out of Eve's mouth in a stammering panic. "There's a woman. She's there. She's right there," Eve pointed. "Thomas, he isn't. I didn't mean to. Apathetic, the officers thrust her into the back of a police van and unceremoniously slammed the door shut. Darkness. Doc_E16. Bloodbath. Description. Excerpt from pre-production notes of an unaired episode of the long-defunct documentary series, America's Bloodiest Crimes. Director's note to producer. This is just a rough sketch of how to best incorporate that authentic Emma Faust interrogation footage into the episode. Still waiting on clearance there. Marvin told me it was all good to go. Sorry about that. Anyway, I've done my best to describe it in the meantime. We'll open with a family photo. Really play up the whole "this could happen to anybody" angle. The narrator will say something like, "Narrator. It all started with an act of kindness, a caring brother welcoming his prodigal sister into his home, under his roof. If only he had known the horrors it would bring upon his family." Note. Then we throw up some crime scene stock footage. Yellow tape, blinking sirens, gathering crowds. A close-up of the bloody hammer, the corkscrew, teeth on the floor. Then cut to episode title, The Faust Family Bloodbath. Insanity, vengeance, or paranormal? Hold on to that for a beat. Fade it out to black, and authentic interrogation room footage cuts in. Again, I can only describe it in text until Marvin sorts out clearance. Sorry. Shot from 2 separate mounted CCTV cameras. It opens with a stationary image of a white-walled interrogation room. Emma Faust sits alone, sleep-deprived, dead-eyed. Narrator. Over paused footage. This is Interrogation Room 5 of the Portland Bureau Police North Precinct. Emma Faust is either putting on a show, or she truly believes she is someone else entirely. She sits waiting, handcuffed. She has just been transferred from the Psychiatric Intensive Care Unit, PICU, at Providence Portland Medical Center. There, she received treatment for a stab wound to her right thigh, inflicted in self-defense by the late Paige Victoria Faust. It is 4 weeks after the infamous Faust family bloodbath. Emma Faust is in custody awaiting a trial, and she's still insisting her real name is Evelyn Patricia Palmer, a person who, by all accounts and records, does not exist. Director's note. Narration dialogue is just rough right now. Gonna get Lucy to punch it all up. Footage. The image fast-forwards 10 minutes and 37 seconds. Emma barely moves the entire time. She sits slumped in the chair, staring blankly at the wall ahead, until, behind her, the door clicks open. We snap back to real time, and in steps Officer Kelly Kieran, the Bureau's lead detective. Clean-shaven head, athletic build. He sits down across from Emma. Narrator. Over paused footage. Kieran, with over 2 decades' experience and hundreds of successful interrogations, is a force to be reckoned with, both in the box and out. In Emma Faust's case, police already have all the evidence they need for an airtight conviction. But Emma, against her own lawyer's wishes, has agreed to this one-on-one interview a month after the incident. And Kieran, relentless pursuer of justice that he is, will never turn down an opportunity to gather more evidence. Besides, at this juncture, it seemed all but inevitable that Emma's lawyers would be gunning for an insanity plea. But the jury was still out. Footage. Kieran shuffles papers around, glances up toward Emma. Kieran. You understand that you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say today can be used against you in a court of... Emma. Yes, I already signed a waiver. Footage. Kieran glances down at his papers again, nods to himself. He looks back up. Kieran. Can I get one of my guys to grab you anything? Water? Pepsi? Footage. Emma doesn't respond. She's staring down at the table. Dissociating? Kieran. You more of a Coca-Cola person? Emma? Emma looks up. Eve. My name is Eve. Footage. Kieran shifts back in his chair, weighing his next words. Narrator. Over paused footage. Here, Kieran makes a calculated decision. Play along with Emma's delusion. Up to now, according to his records, Kieran still believed Emma was fabricating a convoluted lie in an attempt to plead insanity. A classic play for inexperienced criminals. Little do they know, criminal psych wards are often far more hellish than actual prisons. Kieran. What brings you in today, Eve? Emma. There's evidence back at the house. It proves my side of the story. Footage. Kieran, disappointed, leans back in his chair. He's heard this one before. Kieran. Yes, your lawyer's already communicated that to us. Emma. And? Kieran, losing patience. We sent a very expensive forensics team back a few days ago. They scoured the basement, found nothing. Footage. Emma scoffs and leans forward. She's wedging her shoulder into the wall for balance, due to her hands being cuffed behind her back. Emma. But they sent somebody through the passageway in the basement, right? Kieran. Looks at his notes. Hospital maze at the south side of the basement? Nope. They found a small nook, an old coat rack and a couple empty picture frames. No paintings, no photos, no, toy monkey? Emma. No, they looked in the wrong spot. There's a green door and... Kieran. There's no green door, Emma. Emma. Eve. Kieran. It's just a concrete nook. Emma. Maybe there's a passage, hidden in the wall. There has to be something. Narrator. Over paused footage. Kieran's disappointment only grows. He was expecting a breakthrough, a confession, perhaps. Something remotely useful. Kieran. Okay. We've already done this. Do you have anything real for me? Or you just want to share more ghost stories? Emma. The man in the cabin, he has a scar, just like... There's a map there, blueprints of the house, Yale. Kieran. We found the cabin. It's burned to a crisp. Happened years ago. Look, I have 4 other cases on my plate right now, so if you... Emma. Please, you have to believe me. I'm not crazy. She begins to sob. Narrator. Over paused footage. Initially, the prosecution had been struggling to come up with a motive to explain Emma's horrific actions that night. This missing piece of the puzzle would play right into the hands of her insanity defense. However, a simple revelation quickly emerged. Before that infamous dinner, Emma was facing an imminent eviction. She had been living with her brother's family for nearly 3 years, an arrangement that began after a tumultuous split from her longtime partner, Charlotte Bastian. Crucially, the night Emma attacked Paige was the very same night Thomas Faust had informed her she had less than a month to vacate the premises. The prosecution would go on to argue that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. This is what motivated Emma's heinous retaliation. Mr. and Mrs. Faust threatened to remove the roof over her head, so she lashed out. And when the weight of her actions bore down on her, Emma crafted a sprawling and bizarre tale about alternate realities, endless labyrinths, ancient evils, and doppelgangers. As far as insanity goes, this was the play. But how the chips would fall in court was still very much up in the air. Note: Devin suggested that maybe we can add a joke here about how the most unbelievable part of Emma's story is the fact that she claimed 2 millennials could afford property. Dev thinks that type of stuff does well with the younger generations. I'm not so sure. I don't think it feels right, tonally speaking. Now, Officer Kieran opts to up the pressure, if only a small amount. He waits for Emma to collect herself, then strikes with, Kieran.
Look, I understand where you're coming from. Thomas was gonna kick you to the curb. He took you in and then just tossed you away like...
Emma. He never took me in. I already told you. Me, my partner, we bought that house. Barely 2 months ago. Kieran, glancing at papers.
Charlotte Bastian, right? We finally got a hold of her yesterday. She says the 2 of you haven't spoken in at least a few years.
Emma, increasingly manic. No, that's not her. That's not my Charlie. Kieran.
Charlie?
Emma. My Charlie has a tattoo. A black triangle on her index finger knuckle. My parents, Richard and Lynette Palmer. They live in New York. Have you gotten a hold of them? Narrator, over paused footage. At this point in the interrogation, even the jaded Officer Kieran seems thrown off by her sincerity. You can see the self-doubt on his face, perhaps even sympathy for Emma. Despite this, he went on to recommend the prosecution press charges in the highest degree. Kieran, glancing back at notes.
Richard and Lynette Palmer, Rochester. I had one of my detectives reach out to them.
Flips through papers, stops, reads, looks up.
They don't have any children. They don't know who you are.
Emma, shaking her head. No, you got the wrong ones. There's other people with those names. There's... Kieran, sifting through notes.
Richard and Lynette Palmer, 382 Pinehurst Avenue.
Footage. Kieran holds up a photo of an older couple. It's clear from Emma's reaction that she recognizes them, or at the very least, she's doing a very convincing job at pretending to. Kieran, setting the photo down.
They don't know you.
Narrator, over paused footage. The childless Mr. and Mrs. Palmer would go on to suffer inordinate amounts of harassment from a fringe but devoted group known as Redacted, a community of online conspiracy theorists who are convinced that Emma Faust's delusions were caused by real events. This loosely organized community gained some mainstream traction after the televised trial, but have mostly fallen back into obscurity. Footage. Emma is at a loss for words. Kieran.
Emma, can you tell me why Thomas and Paige wanted you out of the house?
Footage. Emma's eyes flick back and forth, and then she locks her gaze onto Kieran. For the remainder of the tape's near 2-minute runtime, she does not blink. Emma. I don't know. Narrator, over paused footage. We are about to witness the normally level-headed Officer Kieran have an uncharacteristic outburst in which he divulges information the suspect should not be privy to. A mistake he was reprimanded for after the interrogation. Kieran has had enough. We have a dead mother. We have 3 children so traumatized they can barely string a sentence together without breaking into sobs. Do you want to tell me why you did this? Or do you want to waste more of the state's time and resources? We have a father of 3 in a coma, shattered trachea, face torn open. His life is hanging by a thread. This, right now, right here, is your only chance at redemption. Do you understand? Either you tell me the truth right now, or you live with this for the rest of your life. Narrator, over paused footage. An observant viewer would have noticed that Eve stopped listening to everything Kieran said after, "We have a father of 3 in a coma." Her panic, previously boiling under the surface, explodes to the forefront. Emma. Thomas is still alive? Kieran. Lord willing, but... Footage. Before Kieran can finish his sentence, Eve tries to stand, a flurry of illegible panic. Stumbling, she finally shoots up from her chair, starts for the exit. Emma. No, I have to get out of here. Narrator, over paused footage. It's at this moment when the footage infuriatingly ends. A malfunction with the CCTV system. Sources close to the matter tell us that 2 other officers burst into the room and subdued her. Producer feedback. It's a so-so start. Right off the bat, let's cut out most of the narration stuff. It feels way too clunky, / over-the-top, / tonally off, etc. Please tell me we haven't paid a voice actor yet. Also, if Marvin can't clear the footage by tomorrow, tell him it's okay. We'll hire someone else to do his job. Looking forward to chatting. Old wounds. Everyone keeps calling me Emma Faust, but my name is Eve Palmer. My current residence is 3709 Heritage Lane. My partner, the love of my life, is Charlie Bastion. We've been together for the better part of the last decade. I don't care what my supposed birth certificate says, what my ID reads. My name is Eve Palmer. But everyone keeps calling me Emma Faust. And somehow, according to more official documents, Thomas owns the house. Our parents left it to him, and he's presumably lived there with his family for over a decade. All the neighbors vouch for him, Heather included. Of the few people I've been able to contact from my old life, none of them know who I am. Not even my own parents. And Charlie? I'll get to that. As far as I can tell, I look the way I always have, but everyone treats me like I'm a completely different person. It's like I've been forced into a different reality altogether. Or maybe everything around me changed. I'm still figuring it all out. But whatever happened, beyond all logic, all justice, I'm locked away in Greenwood Asylum, a criminal psych ward in downstate Washington. Cooped up in a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. Beige walls, cold light, rickety bed. My only solace is a barred window overlooking a pond of turtles. I've memorized their routines, their hierarchies. Who gets the best spot on the toppled log? That would be Greg. I've been here almost 3 years now. Feels like 10. And thanks to the televised trial and the never-ending parade of tabloids, that horrific night was transformed into a nationwide spectacle. The vultures with cameras and microphones tastefully coined it the Faust family bloodbath. I suppose there's a ring to it. But still, many of those headlines are forever burned into my brainstem. After Good Samaritan brother threatens eviction, manic sister brutalizes family. Rumor alert. Avoiding responsibility? Emma Faust claims she was haunted by an evil spirit that bent reality and rearranged furniture? Find out more in our exclusive interview with a neighboring couple at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. From young, faithful Protestant to vengeful psycho killer, the Emma Faust story, a 5-part miniseries. I will spare you the rest. After that night, as I'm sure you've heard, I was charged with 1-count homicide and 1-count attempted, but the jury found me not guilty by reason of insanity. Somehow, that felt worse than a conviction. Though, after the trial, a small but loyal group of supporters formed. Some of them even wrote me letters and sent gifts. I'm pretty sure more than a few of them are suffering from actual delusions, but still, it's nice to have support, no matter where from, no matter how fleeting. And circling back to Greenwood Asylum, let's just say it's not what I'd expected. Before all this, I'd half imagined these places to be sprawling Gothic compounds, gargoyles, pointed roofs, swirling bats, all of it stowed away at the top of a perpetually stormy mountain. But Greenwood is across the street from a dairy farm and a Dollar General. And aside from the secure cell wings, it looks more like a low-cost nursing home than a Baroque prison. Sky blue walls, non-slip flooring. There's even a small library and a room with puzzles and board games for the lower-risk residents. But don't let all that fool you. This place is hell. Overcrowded, underfunded hell. No pits of fire, but those secure cell wings are a close substitution. I spent my first 3 months in one of those underground nightmares, screaming, and I can't even talk about it without snapping back into full-blown terror, so let's not. Of course, everything here, no matter the wing, is carefully controlled, obsessively curated. Cameras in every corner, guards in every hall. Door handles are slanted downward to prevent hangings, and all the cutlery is made of flimsy plastic to prevent, well, you can imagine. Now, my daily routine consists of pills at 8 a.m., a supervised nature walk at 9, 10 minutes of standing in a gravel courtyard next to a dying tree, pills at noon, group therapy at 2, pills at 6, and once a month, a 15-minute debrief with the lead doctor, Preston Carver. A name that about matches the way he looks. A tall, graying wisp of a man with a severe way about him. I learned pretty fast, once I'd broken out of my 3-month mania, that if I ever wanted to see the light of day, I needed to be strategic about how I talked with Dr. Carver, how I acted in general. When I first came in, I was frantic, desperately trying to prove my side of the story, rambling about my past life, Charlie, Shiloh, the evidence back at the house, photographs and the like. Things that would prove I was Eve Palmer. Prove my version of events. Soon enough, it became clear none of this evidence existed anymore. And even if it did, I'd need a lot more than a box of photographs to convince anyone with actual authority. So I learned to play along, to pretend my so-called delusions were just that, fantasies. Nothing more than a complex narrative I'd spun to cope with my heinous crimes. I pretended I was getting better, bit by bit, saying anything I could to shorten my time locked up here, to avoid those secure cell wings. But all the while, I knew what the truth was. You don't need a PhD to know that actual psychotic delusions and hallucinations don't resemble what I experienced. So sudden and impossibly intricate. These weren't hallucinations. These weren't delusions. Somehow Thomas, or something in that house, twisted reality around me like a frayed wire. And maybe his sister, Allison, was in on it too. As for the rest of his family, Paige, Newton, Jenny, Kai, I'm not sure if they were mindless puppets, hostages, or something in between. Who knows? In the weeks following the incident, I thought everyone was playing some terrible trick on me, even the doctors. But I soon dropped that conviction. For the most part, they were all just as confused as I was. Like I said, neighbors, friends, my own parents. Almost no one recognizes me anymore. And the few who do insist my name is Emma Faust, Charlie included. About a half a year into my incarceration, after dozens of tries, I finally got a hold of her, or rather, this Charlotte version of her. It was a Monday, or maybe a Tuesday. I was sitting alone in the ward's windowless phone room. Nothing but the sound of the creaky ventilation, the buzz of lights, the murmurs of the staff outside. As I held the phone to my ear, the dial tone rang out 3 times, and then, hello? Even knowing it wasn't my Charlie, simply hearing her voice filled me with hope. Like I'd been lost in a desert, dying of thirst, and come across a stale puddle. Charlie, I said, it's Eve, Emma. I've been trying to get a hold of you. I know. Charlotte, paused, the silence heavy. I'm sorry, it's been a lot with the news, reporters, and Charlotte. Several thoughts came out at once. What they're saying about me, I refocused, calmed myself. Breathe in, breathe out. I've been gathering evidence, and soon I'll be able to prove my side of the story. I found articles online, documents, breadcrumbs. There's even a doctor in Norway. He had this patient with a similar thing, and I'm not the only person this has happened to. Emma, she cut in, sounding on the verge of tears. I love you, despite how things ended between us. Despite all this, I always will. But I can't. I can't. I only answered because I hope you get the help you need. And her voice cracked. I can't do this. I have to go. Wait, Charlie. Please, don't hang up. No response. Charlotte's breathing. And then a soft voice in the background. An unfamiliar woman. Is everything okay? Yeah, Charlotte replied, her voice turning from the phone. Oh, just be a second. Go back to bed. More silence. Had the call dropped? Charlotte? Yeah. Almost to myself, I said, Why did we end things? You really don't remember? I shook my head. I don't. Charlotte sighed. I don't think it's just tell me. Another painfully long silence. The buzz of lights. A ticking clock. Charlotte relented. I woke up one night. Your side of the bed was empty. You were in the living room,
packing up your things. You barely said a word. You just left. Dead air. Voice hushed, I said. Why? Why? Charlotte absent-mindedly clicked her teeth, just like Charlie used to do when she was stressed out. Charlotte sighed again. I've been wondering that for the last few years, Emma. A short pause. Look, I need to get the locket, I suddenly remembered. Paige, she was wearing your locket. Locket? The brass one. The one with the photo of me. Paige was... Emma, I don't have... You need to let this go. All of this. You need to listen to the doctors. Focus on getting better, okay? I'm sorry, but there's nothing more to... No, wait, Click. And with that, Charlotte ended the call. I didn't burst into tears. I didn't even slam the phone into the receiver. Instead, I gently set it down, took a deep breath, and exhaled. My resolve to get out of here only grew stronger. If Greenwood Asylum didn't have a library, there's a good chance I would have actually lost my mind. And for patients who showcase exceptionally good behavior, there are computers with internet. Slow internet, 10 minutes a day, but still. That's where I was doing my research, outlining the real version of events, putting together my case. Like I said to Charlotte, I was gathering evidence, documents. Nothing big enough to convince skeptics, but eventually I just stopped. I stopped because the more breadcrumbs of proof I found, the worse I felt. Like something was toying with me, giving me rays of hope, only to send me plummeting into more panic spirals. Hell, after coming across a stupid forum post about the Mandela effect, I fell into a state of terror so profound, I nearly got thrown back into the secure cell wing. There's no telling what will set me off these days. Maybe Charlotte was right, I had thought. Maybe I should just listen to the doctors. Focus on getting better. So I went back to simply playing along, pretending like I was just another patient, taking my pills, going on my nature walks, staying away from those library computers, waiting until I could finally get out on probation. So long as I could avoid the secure cell wing, stay stable, say the right things to the doctors, if nothing set me off, then maybe I could, at the very least, escape Greenwood. Despite everything, I was hopeful. At least, I was until a few days ago. I was lying on my bed when my eyes caught something. Up on the white stucco ceiling, a solitary ant wandering in aimless circles. Emma! A voice snapped me out of my daze. I turned. Standing in the doorway was a nurse with 2 security guards behind her. Someone's here to see you. Cold, fluorescent light flickered over the family visitation area. White brick walls, checkered tile floors, spaced apart tables. In the far corner, a playmat covered in long-neglected toys, Duplo, Lincoln logs, stuffed animals. Guards stood at attention in every doorway. The main door buzzed open, and in walked Thomas Faust, my so-called brother. A cold chill ran down my back, and my heart spasmed with a nauseating lurch. He caught my eyes from across the room and gave a bleak smile. The side of his face was gashed with a familiar scar, but considering the injury, it was surprisingly well healed. And all his teeth were back. Dental implants? I looked down at my handcuffed wrists, avoiding eye contact. Thomas padded over, pulled up a chair, and sat across from me.
A long silence passed. Those buzzing lights, distant weeping, muffled and sorrowful, slowly turning into maniacal screams, then falling silent.
Emma,
Thomas nudged, finally breaking the silence. I didn't look up. My eyes traced back and forth along the handcuff's chain. It was attached to a metal hook in the table's center. He cleared his throat.
they didn't tell you I was coming?
I remained silent.
Thomas spoke softly. It's okay if you're still not ready to talk. I understand. I needed to share a few things.
Again, he waited for me to acknowledge him. But I kept my eyes down, kept quiet. After another long stretch of nothing, he continued.
I'm not good with this sort of...
He tapped a finger against the table.
This was kind of a while back, but you remember Buckley, right?
Nope. Regardless, Thomas went on.
Buckley, he said. The chocolate lab we got from the neighbors. I told Mom and Dad I'd take care of him.
He breathed out his nose.
For 2 years, he was so good, and then he just, out of nowhere, attacked me, bit my arm. We tried to put him up for adoption, but, well, you know.
He paused.
Everyone kept trying to make me feel better, except Dad. He said I needed to get over it by the end of the week.
Thomas chuckled bitterly.
Mom told me pets come and go all the time. It's part of life. Buckley's up in heaven now.
Thomas sighed, shifting his weight.
You were so young back then. I don't know if you remember this, but you're the only one who actually made me feel any better.
Leery, I looked up. Thomas was gazing down at the table now.
You just sat beside me, he continued, wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and let me cry. That's it. No lessons, no advice, no ultimatums. You just sat there quietly. And that reminded me, it's okay to feel like shit sometimes.
He sniffed a little, eyes starting to water.
Gosh, Emma, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about what happened lately, and...
He looked right at me. I looked away, focusing on a pockmark in the wall.
It's okay if you don't want to talk, he repeated. I get it. I just wanted to let you know that...
He fell silent, thinking over his next words carefully.
I've been working on myself a lot, and through all this, recovering after my injuries, Paige's passing, raising the kids. I've rejoined the church. Don't know if you even knew I'd lost my faith, but...
He paused, again expecting me to say something. And still, I remained silent. He cleared his throat.
I've been talking with the doctors here, and they said you've made a lot of progress. They said as long as you keep at it, keep improving, following their guidance, as long as nothing unexpected sets you off, you could be out on probation sooner than you think.
In the corner of my eye, he kept staring at me, a blurred visage. Again, the sincerity in his voice sent a cold wash of doubt into my psyche. Was I truly insane, after all? Maybe I was supposed to be here.
No, Look, he said. I've come to accept you weren't in control of your actions. You have a condition you're being treated for, and I just wanted to let you know that... Emma?
He leaned in slightly.
Emma, could you look at me?
Slowly, I turned and stared blankly into his eyes. He stared back, and then, with a sad smile, said, "I forgive you." The words lingered between us like a rotting stench, but my expression remained neutral. A few tense seconds went by until he nodded slowly and put up his hands in a little surrender. "I understand. We can talk when you're ready." He stood up, turned to leave, and froze. "Oh, I almost forgot." Stepping back, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. "The guard said I could leave this here." He placed it on the table. "I know it meant a lot to you and Charlie." Charlie? For the last time, I looked at him. His somber face twitched, a barely perceptible movement below his right eye. Then he knocked the table twice, turned around, and went for the exit. Footsteps punctuated the silence. The door buzzed shut as he left. I just sat there, staring at the envelope. I already knew what was inside, but I couldn't bring myself to look. Once again, seconds dragged by like minutes until finally I reached forward, opened it, looked inside. Just as I expected, it was the locket. Charlie's locket. I pulled it out, flicked it open, and there it was. The blurry photo of me. The one Charlie took when we first started dating. The one she put up in her gallery on that rain-soaked day in Rochester all those years ago. The one in which, at the last second, I'd turned away, held up a hand, and hid my face. The only known photo of Eve Palmer. Doc_E25. Help. Description. Transcript of post on highstrangenessforums.net. Post title. My partner went missing, but everyone is telling me she never existed to begin with. Body. I never thought I'd be posting on a site like this, but right now I don't know where else to turn. I've exhausted all other avenues. Family, police, the fucking FBI, everything. On date redacted, I returned home to address redacted, and found our recently purchased property looking as though it had been abandoned for decades. Boarded up, completely falling apart. My partner, name redacted, was gone. Only our dog remained, wandering around the nearby woods. All other evidence of my life with name redacted, including photos, text messages, emails, all of it, vanished overnight. The authorities, my friends and family, everyone in my life insists that name redacted isn't a real person. I've nearly been institutionalized multiple times, but I'm not giving up. If anyone has any idea, any information, no matter how outlandish, please, help. For more details, contact me here. Email redacted.